Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's meeting of the Environment and Place Overview and Scrutiny Committee. My name is Councillor Chris Rigby, and I'll be chairing the meeting this evening. Firstly, I'd just like to pass over to Rebecca from Democratic Services, just for a little bit of housekeeping.
Thank you, Chair. Please note that this meeting is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. The meeting may also be recorded or streamed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public, although ultimate discretion in this matter lies with the Chair in case of disruption. For those in the room, please note that if the fire alarm sounds, please exit the building by way of the nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the assembly point in the car park at the front of this building. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum and mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. For those in the room, this includes turning off microphones and turning down the volume completely on your laptops. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And have we got any apologies for this evening?
Yes, Chair. We've received apologies from Councillor Joe Clements and Councillor Jamie Martin, and Councillor Jackie Edwards is joining us online.
Great, thank you. And any substitute members?
Yes, Councillor Patrick Canavan is substituting for Councillor Jamie Martin.
Great, thank you. Very welcome, Councillor Caravan. Just looking at the committee, does anyone have any declarations of interest on anything on the agenda this evening? No? Great. And minutes of the last meeting is item 4. So is there any dissent over the minutes of the last meeting, or am I okay to approve those? Great, we'll do that. Item number 5 is our recommendation tracker. This is just for note. There's nothing been added to that since the last time we saw that, so there's no need to have any debate on the item. And straight into item number 6, which is public issues. This evening, we've got a lot of public in for people who are watching online, and thank you very much. But I'm just going to read this out, and it's just as a reminder that this meeting is being held in public, not a public meeting, with public attendance to observe proceedings and debate. I'll therefore request that members of the public remain silent throughout all items, please. We've got a number of statements tonight. A lot of them are on the Christchurch Harbour item. And what I'm going to say is we've got also a lot of people in here. So it's my intention to ask you all to stay until the completion of the Christchurch Harbour item, at least. I am going to intend to try and wrap that up by 7:30. So hopefully people have enough time to shoot off to whatever engagements you might have afterwards. We'll have a short break and then we'll reconvene as a committee after that. Also, with the public statements, we normally have 15 minutes, but with the number that we've got, I minded to extend this a little bit. And we've got 8 public statements. I've got 2 ward councillors who want to speak. And I'm also going to set aside 15 minutes for the Christchurch Harbour Marine Society to address the committee as the organisation who brought the petition to full council. I don't think there'll be any statements which we don't reach in the 15 minutes, but if we don't, they have been circulated to everyone on the committee, so everyone has been emailed a copy of them, and we've all read those and have them as well. So, without any further ado, can I invite our first public speaker to come and join us, please, which is a member of our Youth Parliament, which is Polly Homan. Polly, if you'd like to come and take a seat here. If you press the button to speak on the microphone, hopefully you can see it. Perfect.
Hi, my name is Polly. As mentioned, I'm one of the members of Youth Parliament for BCP, and I'm speaking on behalf of all of the members of Youth Parliament. So this year, 3 out of 4 of BCP's members of Youth Parliament were elected after campaigning for cheaper, better and more reliable public transport. That sends a clear message. Transport is one of the most important issues facing young people locally. It can cost around £1,500 a year simply to travel to school. That's not paying for a luxury, it's paying for the bare minimum, access to education. Affordable public transport is the foundation that allows young people to attend school, access opportunities, see friends, and participate fully in their communities. We welcome the new local transport plan, but urge those responsible for delivering it to involve us throughout the process, listen to our experiences, and ensure that the voices of young people help shape the future transport in BCP. We want to make meaningful action to make transport more affordable, more accessible, and more reliable for young people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Polly, and thanks for joining us. It's really nice to have a member of our Youth Parliament here tonight. Our next speaker is Chris Chappello, who's from the Christchurch Harbour Ornithological Group. Chris, if you'd like to take a seat and give us your statement, please.
Thank you. High levels of nitrates in the rivers feeding Christchurch Harbour result in unnaturally high growth of algae, which forms a blanket sometimes several inches thick over the estuarine mud. This results in short-billed wading birds being unable to feed on the mud. Taking the globally declining dunlin as an indicator, CHOG data shows the numbers using the harbour during the autumn migration period, when the algae is most dense, have reduced by 70% in the last 15 years. This outstrips the 20% global decline of the species. Christchurch Harbour is an SSSI and landowners have a legal obligation to keep it in favourable condition. An assessment carried out by Natural England in March 2025 acknowledges an abundance of two forms of algae and makes the statement: overall, the extent of estuarine habitats for supporting the variety of birds is assessed to have shifted to an unfavourable and declining condition. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And the next speaker I have is David Riley from Christchurch Sailing Club. David, if you'd like to take a seat and give us your statement, please.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. I am Rear Commodore in charge of sustainability at Christchurch Sailing Club. Christchurch Sailing Club was founded in 1874. We have seen a vast amount of water pass by in those 152 years. Christchurch Sailing Club became a community interest company in 2021. We have over 900 members aged between 6 and 96. Most who sail on our rivers and in our harbour. The very youngest of our junior team enjoy the rough and tumble of sailing, not thinking of the potential danger that an inadvertent mouthful of water could bring. More perilous would be a spill from a scow sailing dinghy by one of our senior members, the consequences of which could prove fatal. Ingesting the now foul water has proved toxic to more than a few of our members, leading to illness and medical intervention. The vast quantities of nitrates, phosphates and sewerage present in the water has increased exponentially, and this needs to stop. Fundamentally, Christchurch Sailing Club has the community's interest at its heart. The rivers are its arteries, and they must be protected. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Our next speaker this evening is Sarah Glenn from Hengistbury Head Outdoors.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm very grateful that BCP handed over Hengistbury Head Outdoors to a community benefit society. The ability for us to deliver an amazing water sports and health and wellbeing retreat is dependent on the quality of the water in Christchurch Harbour. I sit here tonight representing over 1,000 users who regularly use the water. We're an ecosystem on the water with the rowing club, with the Bourne Dragons, with all of the other sailing clubs that use the facilities. We've already had one of our sailors and also one of our paddleboarders have a significant infection as a result of capsizing. Now, we cannot prove it. We can say causation in the fact that they've been in the water, and we know the water quality is poor. I was here last year representing Hengistbury Head to really urge you to get the protections in the harbour to allow us to also have the ability to do the monitoring so that we can work together to solve this problem. We have our confidence and faith in you to take action. Please listen to these representations. Mine is just one for Hengistbury Head Outdoors, but there are many water sports users who need your help.
Thank you very much. Our fifth speaker this evening is from Henra, and this is to be read by Councillor Judy Richardson.
I can read it.
Democratic Services can read that if you prefer. Rebecca, do you mind?
Yeah, so this is from Henra, and their statement is as follows. Water pollution is having a serious impact on the quality of life for residents represented by Henra. Christchurch Harbour has always been a place where families come together to enjoy the natural environment, where paddling with grandchildren, walking dogs along the shoreline, crabbing, swimming, or taking part in other water-based activities. These are simple pleasures that generations of local people have enjoyed in the belief that the harbour was a safe place for everyone. Increasing sewage discharges and pollution are undermining that confidence, forcing residents to question whether it is safe to enter or even come into contact with the water. No family should have to worry that a child playing at the water's edge or a grandparent enjoying time with loved ones could be exposed to harmful contamination. Christchurch Harbour should remain a treasured community asset that brings people together, not somewhere for people to fear their health and well-being.
Thank you, Rebecca. The sixth speaker this evening is from Muddyford and District Fishermen's Association, and that's Ed Blanchard. Ed, if you'd like to take a seat and give us your statement, please.
Good evening. A number of our members fish with nets in Christchurch Harbour using small boats. That number is 3 boats, two rowing boats and 1 powered vessel. We're fishing in very shallow water, so we note the changes, and the notable changes we've seen in recent years are a large decline in the fish available to us, mullet, bass, flounders, to the point where the fish is barely viable to actually carry out. We've also caught a large number of diseased bass from within the harbour. We've had them analysed by the Fish Health Inspectorate from CFAS. That's the Centre for Environmental Fisheries, Agriculture and Science, who showed that they were infected with, these are big words for me, Aromonas salmonicidae, which is an opportunistic bacterium causing furunculosis in fish, which is characterised by severe skin ulcers and sepsis. We had one fish which we could see through an open wound right through the fish. These outbreaks in wild fish are associated with environmental stress caused by poor water quality. There's also been a large decline in the number of harbour crabs coming up in our nets. We only occasionally get where we would catch bucketfuls in a net. And early season, there was a slurry covering the silt all over the bed of the harbour, which was like a misty cloud. It smelt awful, and it just should not have been there after the floods normally flush the harbour through. So it's just panic stations for us. You lot as well, hopefully. That's me.
Thank you, Ed. The next 2 speakers I don't believe we have here tonight, so I'll hand over to Rebecca if you can read these next 2 statements for us, please.
Yes, certainly, Chair. I'll try to do that in the time we have left. So the first statement is from Jim Atkins, Christchurch Harbour Watch. I write on behalf of and as Chair of Christchurch Harbour Watch, an organisation representing the sailing clubs, rowing clubs, SUP users and all other users, with the aims of safety, security and enjoyment of Christchurch Harbour and rivers Avon and Stour. I am also personally a past Commodore of Christchurch Sailing Club and have been using the rivers and harbour for over 45 years. During that time, our members and I have both seen, experienced and reported a major deterioration of the water quality and the increasing pollution in the rivers Stour and Avon and Christchurch Harbour. We urge BCP Council, for the sake of the health of the residents and for ecological and wildlife protection, to take urgent action on the environmental protection of Christchurch Harbour, as voted for unanimously by full BCP Council on the 25th of March 2025. And the last statement tonight, Chair, is from Highcliffe Sailing Club. Urgent action. Okay.
Yeah, if you'd like to join us and come and read that statement, then that'd be great. If you could introduce yourself as well, please. Thank you.
My name is Jim Brown. I'm taking the place of Mark Emerson, who sent the statement in. So this is a statement from Highcliffe Sailing Club. The title was Urgent Action Needed on the Water Quality in Christchurch Harbour. Foul play in our playground. Members of Highcliffe Sailing Club are outraged at the state of our harbour. With over 700 active members using Christchurch Harbour for sailing, kayaking and paddleboarding, we are deeply concerned about the state of the water in the harbour. Wessex Water is responsible for pumping sewage into our harbour through the Avon and Stour rivers, a designated SSSI area. In 2025 alone, sewage overflows in the area ran for around 199 hours, roughly 4.5 times a week. This directly threatens our ability to operate safely and undermines public confidence in a waterway that hundreds of families and residents rely on for sport and well-being. The council has committed publicly to community well-being. We ask that this commitment extend to protecting our waterways for nature's sake and for the well-being of future generations. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jim, and sorry we didn't have your name for that. Okay, we've got all of the statements through now, so what I'd like to do is invite up, sorry, let me make sure I've got the correct names, Christchurch Harbour Marine Society, which is Martin Stewart, and I believe you've got two other people who you want to bring up with you as well, Martin, if that's okay. If you'd like to come and take a seat, and we've set aside up to 15 minutes for all of you to speak.
Thank you. So if you just press the mic.
If you can just press the
button there.
button to turn on the microphone. Great, thank you.
I'm reading a praise seed version of my statement. I believe my full statement's been sent out. Thank you for allowing us to present this evening. We're here on behalf of an increasingly vocal and frustrated resident population of Christchurch. But far more importantly, we're here to defend both Christchurch Harbour and its resident and migrating wildlife that cannot defend themselves. According to DEFRA statistics, Christchurch Harbour is 1/15 the surface area of Poole Harbour, and at low tide, approximately 1/15 the water volume. Why is this comparison relevant? Poole Harbour benefits from a clearer and simpler overall management structure, with the Poole Harbour Commissioners in overall administration. It has an environmental protection policy and two much smaller rivers running into it, the Froome and the Piddle. Rivers with a relatively tiny catchment area. Poole Harbour also benefits from a far greater tidal movement. The comparatively tiny Christchurch Harbour has no protection, apart from the SSSI on its southern side. No clear voice defending it, and two very large rivers in the Stour and the Avon flowing into it. The catchment area of the two rivers is colossal. Christchurch Harbour also has the lowest tidal movement of any harbour in central southern England. And these are DEFRA, this is all DEFRA info, and everything written here on my full document has been referenced, as well as a double high tide, which reduces the time the harbour has to flow out to sea. The Hampshire Avon and the Dorset Stour are fed by a total of 89 tributaries and a total catchment area of nearly 3,000 square kilometres. That's Environment Agency data. This leads to Christchurch Harbour, which has a surface area of 2.74 kilometres, meaning that the surface area of the catchments leading into the harbour is 1,090 times more than the surface area of Christchurch Harbour. It is tiny. This water then exits through the run to the sea through a narrow 250-metre long channel. This creates extremely low flushing capabilities within the harbour, leading to extended retention of pollutants, higher occurrence of bioaccumulation within living organisms such as fish, birds and protected wildlife, resulting in longer direct exposure of pollutants to humans and the environment. Wessex Water has a total of 88 wastewater. It's funny sitting next to Matt here. He's going to be marking my homework. Wessex Water has a total of 88 wastewater treatment works, 505 pumping stations and 165 storm overflows that feed into the Dorset Stour and Hampshire Avon. Due to the poor flushing capabilities of the harbour and the extreme pressure of wastewater effluent, Christchurch Harbour is extremely vulnerable to pollutants contamination. But this is not, please, just about sewage. The pressures are also from nitrates, fertiliser, which leaches off farmland, phosphates as a byproduct of livestock grazing inland, and we know how large the catchment area is. It's also about runoff from roads. It's also about chemicals leaching from the numerous landfill sites, and Gracie Needham from Bournemouth Uni will be talking about that shortly. We know from regular testing that the levels of nitrates, phosphates and E. coli are much higher than the accepted levels. The dangers to the many thousands of swimmers, paddleboarders, rowers, sailors, windsurfers, kite surfers, kayakers and canoeists is increasing. The natural world has seen dramatic changes. The levels of fish stocks have fallen significantly, as you've heard from the Christchurch fishing community. The growth of algal bloom, invasive weed to the layman, is growing. In the short term, this invasive weed growth means that the migrating resident birds are struggling to reach their feed. You've heard a statement from Chog. But in the future, this will lead to stinking, rotting weed on the beaches, which will in time affect tourism and the local economy. There are plenty of examples around the world where the spread of Gralceolaria and Sargassum blooms are causing enormous issues. Other harbours in the UK are suffering, as well as cases in northern France and some very dramatic photographs from Caribbean beaches. You'll be able to find them. However, in many people's eyes, sewage outfalls and the underinvestment in the sewage treatment process is the major concern. We have no doubt that Wessex Water will try to convince you that it's all under control. In our opinion, it isn't. We have met Matt before, and on each occasion he has said that if it was just sewage they were dealing with, they could cope. What they struggle with, and I'll be corrected later, Matt, I'm sure, what they struggle with is the level of contaminated water, that is fresh rainwater infiltrating the foul water drainage system after a heavy period of rain. There is no doubt that many aspects of our sewage infrastructure is antiquated. But please, when considering that fact, do not stop thinking about the harbour facing all of the negative consequences. It is fair to say that we've seen a reduction in phosphate levels in the Stour coinciding with the completion of the huge new holding tank at Holdenhouse, constructed to enable contaminated water to be released in a controlled manner. So investment can make a difference. But this week alone, we have received 4 notifications and sets of photographs of sewage issues within the harbour. We've seen a bloom, a cluster, they'll have a name for them soon, of wet wipes that have been filmed drifting through the harbour this week. We cannot blame these incidents on the volume of contaminated water. It has not rained for weeks. We know that Stony Lane sewage treatment works is an issue. Its storm overflow outfall pipe is after, and this is crucial, is after what we refer to as the Avon split. The reason why in Christchurch there are 2 bridges. We test on both the eastern and western sides every week. Phosphate levels on the eastern side below the outfall are consistently 4 to 5 times higher than the western side. They were the same river 400 metres earlier. We believe that this outfall is a major contributor to the pressure on Christchurch Harbour. Apparently there are plans to upgrade the plant in 2030. Christchurch deserves better and quicker. The Malaysian owners of Wessex Water paid themselves 75 million quid in dividends in the last full accounts that we have seen. 2 fingers to Christchurch, it would appear. Wessex Water have clearly shown that investment can improve things, but that investment is painfully slow. And with a police station site adding 169 dwellings for Stony Lane treatment works to deal with, it is easy to understand why this environment protection policy has been living in the too hard to deliver drawer. The police station site went ahead once the developers were able to buy phosphate credits from a third party. That says we can buy permission to carry on polluting Christchurch Harbour. Our generation should be ashamed of ourselves. Honestly, what message does that send to the wildlife and future generations? Those of us with a voice and those of you in authority need to effect real, proper, meaningful change to protect this wonderful, delicate body of water. Stony Lane should have been upgraded first. That's why we need this environmental protection policy, to ensure capacity is provided before and not after future developments. If somehow Wessex Water do convince you there is no problem, then they have nothing to fear from an environmental protection policy. But it's not just them anyway. All the other causes of pollution must be taken into account. I'd like to say a few vital words on Stampit Marsh.
Just to let you know, you're about halfway through the time for all your speakers.
Yeah, I've got 2/3 of it, bless these ladies, sorry. Stampit Marsh is clearly displayed in the various websites produced by BCP Council, highlighting the attraction of Christchurch to visitors. Further exploration will reveal the huge benefits of nurturing salt marsh to flora and fauna. Salt marshes are a huge absorber of carbon from our atmosphere. The consequences of the erosion and loss of the salt marsh appears to be subject to concern in other coastal areas. Stanpit Marsh is rapidly eroding. Blackberry Island and North Point are no more, lost in under 10 years. The once island haven for Stanpit ponies to graze in the summer months has gone. And yet nothing appears in BBC websites acknowledging concern. Evidence from other areas indicate that the enrichment of river waters with phosphorus and nitrates have a huge negative effect on the root systems. That's why Stanpit Marsh is designing. Whilst we would like to express our appreciation from what your local rangers and the Environment Agency teams do on the ground, but we do know the EA have limited resources and do not test for E. coli in the Stour or the Avon. We test every week. We have been very supportive. They have been very supportive of our efforts. Indeed, it was Jim here that suggested we work to obtain bathing water status for Christchurch Harbour, saying that if successful, the Environment Agency would be legally obliged to test for E. coli in the Stour and Avon. We are now working with Surfers Against Sewage to try and get that status. So thank you, Jim. That said, if you watch the Channel 4 docudrama Dirty Business, and I would suggest for those of you that is a vital watch, then one must maintain a defensive and maybe even cynical position with regard to the very, very senior leadership of the water company and Environment Agency. I'm nearly done. As an administrative body, have the opportunity of adopting a harbour protection policy designed to protect and enhance this valuable ecological area, and which presents clear and punitive consequences to those intent on polluting our cherished rivers and harbour. Please don't let the residents of Christchurch down and the wildlife that depend on a healthy harbour. I'm now going to hand over to Gracie and Tanya from Bournemouth University, who are doing more work on this. Gracie.
Thank you.
Chair.
Grace, if you just click the other speak button on that, you'll get caught on the camera. That's perfect.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Chair and members of the committee, hello, my name is Gracie Needham. I'm an environmental researcher from Bournemouth University studying forever chemicals within the rivers Stour, Avon, and Christchurch Harbour. Being a resident of BCP myself, I have been working closely with the multitude of organizations within the harbour to address the poor water quality, its impacts on the environment and public health, and most importantly, focusing on why the harbour urgently needs a protection plan. Since 2018, citizen science led by the Christchurch Harbour and Marine Society has consistently found concentrations of E. coli well above national standards in waters frequented by vulnerable communities. Not only is the harbour facing the extreme health risk of E. coli in public waters, but the harbour has already been facing eutrophication from nitrates and phosphates from the agricultural lands upstream. This has resulted in the harmful algal blooms that prevent protected wading birds from feeding and discourages migratory birds from stopping within the harbour. In addition, the Mudford and District Fishermen's Association has noted a decline in biodiversity and disease outbreaks linked to poor water quality in recent years. I am now going to introduce the fast emerging environmental threat, forever chemicals. Poly and perfluoroalkali substances, PFAS, or commonly known as forever chemicals, are a group of thousands of newly researched contaminants that pose serious and long-lasting risks to human health and the environment. This is due to their persistence, mobility, and resistance to natural degradation in the environment. Christchurch Harbour is particularly vulnerable to PFAS contamination because the Dorset Stour and Hampshire Avon catchments, which feed Christchurch Harbour, contain numerous potential PFAS sources. These sources include wastewater treatment outfalls leading directly into the Stour and Avon, leaching from agricultural applications of sewage sludge and biocides, historic landfills, and former military sites. PFAS bioaccumulate within aquatic food chains. This threatens the harbor's communities that catch, consume, and provide commercial and locally caught fish and shellfish. PFAS and aquatic systems also provide a direct pathway of exposure to the many residents and visitors who use the harbor for recreational purposes. Despite these risks, perfluorooctane sulfonate, PFOS, which is one single species of PFAS, was monitored only once between 2009 and 2022, with the harbor achieving a failed chemical status in 2019, followed by no subsequent testing since. Under the precautionary principle, a Christchurch Harbor Protection Plan is urgently needed for routine, mandatory PFAS and other contaminant monitoring, as well as to improve the transparency and accountability between government bodies, local authorities, and the public. This protection plan is one of the first steps in safeguarding ecosystem and public health for future generations, as well as setting an important precedent for future harbor protection plans. Thank you, Chair and Councilors, for giving me this time to speak, and feel free to reach out to me about my work with PFAS and water quality research. Thank you.
Tanya.
And Tanya, if you use that one, perfect, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. My name's Tanya. Just for a bit of context, I'm a researcher in environmental law. I hold a first-class degree in environmental science, and I'm about to finish my master's in legal practice as well. And I have 2 short submissions for you today, 3.5 minutes. So my first of those is to demonstrate how environmental designations leverage the functional linkage at Christchurch Harbour. And the second is how the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act 2023 solidifies this into statute. So you might have some slides to refer to. If not, it will hopefully make sense without them. But referring to the slide 1, the River Avon is protected as a special area of conservation. Two of the protected species which qualify it as an SAC are the Atlantic salmon and the sea lamprey. But the clue is in their names, they're not river species. The River Avon is an essential spawning ground and nursing ground as confirmed by the JNCC, who are the statutory nature advisor to the UK government. These protected species reach the protected Avon by swimming up through the unprotected Christchurch Harbour. So they and their vulnerable young must then expose themselves again to the pollution at Christchurch Harbour as they swim back through to the sea. This means that Christchurch Harbour is functionally linked to the Avon, which is a doctrine recognised by Natural England. So referring to slide 2, functional linkage is defined by Natural England as areas outside the formal boundaries of protected sites that ecologically support the species or habitats for which the site was designated. It requires consideration during the habitats regulations assessments to ensure that development does not adversely impact conservation integrity. Referring to slide 3, this further demonstrates the functional linkage at Christchurch Harbour. The map at the bottom shows that Christchurch Harbour itself is a SSSI foraging range and an SPA foraging range for protected bird species, including the sandwich tern. This means that during food shortages in their roosting areas, Christchurch Harbour is an essential feeding ground, and this is more and more crucial because areas are becoming harder to feed in, as demonstrated by everybody here today. So then referring to slide 4, we're now looking at the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act and how this solidifies functional linkage into statute by using its own definitions. It's a bit technical, so bear with me. Section 152 of the Act includes the power to specify environmental outcomes. That means an appropriate authority, such as BCP, may specify outcomes relating to environmental protection. The Act's definition of environmental protection includes the protection of the natural environment from the effects of human activity. And just a side note there, it specifically highlights chalk streams like the Avon. The Act's definition of that natural environment includes wild animals and their habitats, so not only including the protected species, but wildlife as a whole, which is very exciting. I could talk about that for days, but I don't have very much time, so that's amazing. But crucially, in terms of this, the definition includes natural cycles, systems and processes through which they interact, which is functional linkage in statute. So finishing up, given the legal designations, doctrines and statute, and that BCP have already unanimously agreed to protect the Christchurch Harbour in March of last year, I feel this is less a debate about should we or shouldn't we, but actually how are we going to do it? And you don't have to figure this out alone. You have support of all of the groups and individuals who are here today, outside, and many more. And what unites us, all of us, is how deeply we care about our local environment, our communities, and our wildlife. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya, Gracie, Martin. Appreciate you coming in and giving us that presentation. And that brings us to the end of our public speaking element, but I do have 2 ward councillors who have asked to speak to the committee. So Councillors Richardson and Nanano. Could you come and join us, please? Sorry, I can't get my words out today. Thank you.
Good evening. My focus is on a request for stronger planning protection for Christchurch Harbour. So I'm speaking in support of Christchurch Harbour Marine Society in asking BCP Council to adopt strong policies for the protection of Christchurch Harbour, a site of special scientific interest, functionally linked to the River Avon designated special area of conservation, protecting river wildlife species. To ensure that contaminants do not enter the harbour, the main measures requested are: 1, to adopt a highly precautionary approach when assessing planning applications, particularly where there is specific uncertainty about impacts on protected species and habitats. 2, that any pollutants generated by new housing and other developments are identified and fully offset or mitigated before planning permission is granted. Although the River Stour is not currently subject to the same nutrient neutrality requirements as the River Avon, the same strict controls should apply to both catchments, as pollution from both rivers ultimately reaches Christchurch Harbour. And finally, we would ask BCP to lobby central government to create environmental protections similar to the Biodiversity Net Gain programme. These practical planning measures are within the Council's influence and would help ensure that future development does not come at the expense of Christchurch Harbour's unique environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Councillor Bernadette Nanovo, and I'm following on from Councillor Judy Richardson, who is my co-councillor in East Southbourne and Tuckton. We are the closest ward to Christchurch Harbour, and as such, everything that happens there concerns us. And I am also speaking in favour of Christchurch Harbour having its bathing water status. While BCP Council has an important role to play through the planning system, there are also issues that lie beyond the Council's direct control and require action from central government and the Environment Agency. In particular, there needs to be greater pressure put on the water companies to upgrade their wastewater treatment works and prevent sewage systems becoming overloaded during periods of heavy rainfall, which we've already heard from others. Protecting our bathing waters should be a priority for this council because our beaches and water-based leisure activities are fundamental to the character and environment and economy of this area and the health of our residents and wildlife. BCP could adopt a local plan policy that provides stronger environmental protection through nutrient neutrality, pollution mitigation and strict habitat assessments before new development is approved. However, whilst BCP Council can strengthen protection through its local plan, lasting protection for Christchurch Harbour will ultimately require national support. As Judy mentioned earlier, the Biodiversity Net Gain framework, which is already in place for securing environmental improvements to the planning system, a comparable legislative framework is needed to address nutrient pollution and the cumulative impacts of development on sensitive coastal ecosystems. Without the national legislative backing, locally adopted policies and planning decisions remain vulnerable to being challenged or overturned on appeal if they are found to conflict with national planning policy. We therefore urge BCP Council not only to adopt the strongest possible local plan policy, but also to lobby central government, as Judy said earlier, and consistent protection for Christchurch Harbour should be on our minds all the time. And residents can also lobby their MPs because this matter concerns all of us and our health. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. That brings us to the end of item 6, which is our public speaking section. Thank you all for coming in. I really appreciate it. Whenever we get engagement from residents and members of the public coming in here, it's great. It's one of the reasons this committee exists, and I absolutely love to see the public gallery full and people come up. So I do extend my thanks to all of you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to come here. That allows us to move on, believe it or not, to item 7, which is Christchurch Harbour. Joining us for this item, I've got Jim Flory from the Environment Agency and Matt Wheeldon from Wessex Water to give us presentations. I've set aside about 10 minutes each, and I believe you've been working together on something to do. So if I can just hand over to you two for the next 15, 20 minutes or so to give us a little presentation. Thank you.
Certainly can. Thank you, Chair. So good evening, everyone. My name is Jim Flory. I'm an Environment Manager with Environment Agency. I cover a number of different remits, one of which is the Hampshire Avon, but also water quality monitoring and bathing water work. So I've got a brief presentation I'm going to go through. I'll just see if I can try and get the technology to work, see if I can share it. Okay. Try and put that on full screen. Can everybody see that? Yeah, cool. So what I was going to do is do a very quick rundown in relation to sort of what the agency does in relation to water quality, both monitoring and regulation within the harbour. I think what I'd like to do is start off by saying I recognise everybody's passion in relation to the quality of the harbour, the importance of the harbour as a natural resource, as a recreational resource. And fundamentally, that's what we're passionate about, trying to secure and support and work with you to do. What we are limited by is what we have within the current legislation, so what we can and can't do, and I'll touch on that a little bit more, especially in the context of some of the points raised by the other speakers. But what I can do is give you an overview of how we're using the levers we have available to us to try and focus on improving the quality of the harbour. So if I start off, this is really a quick overview of the work we do in the harbour. So a lot of it is driven by something called the Water Framework Directive. So that's a piece of old European legislation that's now encapsulated within UK law. It's what the agency is prescribed to use to then understand water quality and to classify water quality. And its classification is based on ecological status. So it's based on the living environment rather than just a chemical environment. And we do that for the River Stour and the Avon and also the harbour. We also have a statutory duty around fisheries and specifically migratory fish like salmon and sea trout. So we have a fish counter at Nat Mill, which is one of the key counters across the country, certainly within England, of monitoring salmon populations. So it's recording the number of salmon and sea trout coming up and downstream. So we're sort of monitoring very closely what's happening to the salmon populations. Bathing water monitoring, I think it's Martin has already mentioned. So if we undertake bathing water monitoring, so that is specifically looking at water quality that could affect human health. And it's looking for a number of bacterial markers, one of which has been mentioned, E. coli. But we only do that on sites that are designated as bathing waters. And that designation process is administered and run through the Department of the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. So we don't have any oversight in relation to that. But once a site is designated, I think as Martin has already made clear, that gives us the statutory role to then monitor for those bacterial levels and then also to try and undertake investigation work to understand where sources of bacteria may be coming from. We are very, very focused in relation to water company regulation and water company assurance. So since the last 2 years, we have a significant increase in number of staff that are focused on water company sort of regulation. That specifically looks at going out and visiting company sites, water company sites, to make sure that they're complying with the permit and to pick up any issues. And I'll come back to that in a moment. We respond to pollution incidents, and I would really, really encourage, if people don't or aren't aware, if you see pollution, please call it into us. So you can do that through the website or through the internet by looking at environmental pollution. You'll see it come up on the Google search or via phone number 0800 80 70 60. That is absolutely critical to us because we are a finite resource. You are in the harbour all of the time. You see what's happening. you'll see it, we probably won't. So we are reliant sometimes on people phoning in information to help us build intelligence and help us focus on what we do next. Final element of what we do is something called the Water Industry Natural Environment Programme. So this is where we set out what we think water companies should be doing, where their asset investment should be going to improve water quality and to improve the status of our rivers, our harbours, our estuaries going forward. And I'll touch on that a little bit more, and I think probably Matt will go on to that as well in a bit more detail. So what's that look like for the current situation for the harbour? So this is the Water Framework Directive that I mentioned a little earlier on, so based on the ecological status. So the key thing at the moment is it's classed as moderate status, and that is, and we've already mentioned this, is to do with the nitrogen concentrations within the harbour. And that, as again has been mentioned, is a key challenge because that causes eutrophication. So that is enrichment of plant life, of primary production within the harbour that can lead to some of the symptoms and signs that have already been mentioned. Interesting to note on the work that we've done, we think probably about 56% of that nitrogen is coming from agricultural land, so from the catchments within the Stour and within the Avon. Probably around about 11% from sewage treatment works, so discharges, like permitted discharges from Wessex Water, and about another 32% from groundwater. So a lot of the rivers, especially the Avon, are groundwater fed, and a lot of those groundwaters have historic loading of nitrogen from previous practices. So there's some challenges there in relation to how that's managed. We've talked quickly about PFAS, or colleagues from Bournemouth University have talked about that. So at the moment, that's not included in the classification, but there are a number of new chemicals that have been included. So polybrominated biphenyls have been included, and they are present everywhere, unfortunately. And this is one of the challenges we're facing at the moment, is the fact that we're now beginning to understand some of the consequences of the historic products that we've used as a society in relation to achieving different things. So the polybrominated products are things like fire retardants, PFAS, quite often non-stick substances. So a lot of the source of that will be unfortunately coming from all of us through the products we wear, from everything from raincoats to Teflon pans to many other things that will then go down through the sewage system or the surface water system and then will come out into the discharge. The challenge at the moment is the legislation isn't there to say that those substances need to be removed, and indeed how you would remove them then to protect the environment. And it is a ubiquitous problem. So it's not just Christchurch Harbour that's affected by these forever chemicals. And it's something that there's an awful lot of work happening, certainly within the agency, to understand what their environmental fate is, what the pressures are around them, but then ultimately what legislation the government will need to consider to put in place to try and control those going forward. So it's very much, I'll make the analogy of, people are probably familiar with the pesticide DDT. Many years, back in the 60s, 50s, 60s, used liberally. No one really thought about it until someone suddenly realised through a number of pieces of seminal research that that was having a really devastating effect on the environment. And that's the challenge we have now with some of these chemicals that we're just beginning to realise are coming back into the environment. To give you some trends around water quality, so it is, and I definitely categorically hear everything everybody's said around the concerns about the quality of the harbour, but there are some positive news, or there is a positive news story here. So this is just looking at two types of chemical determinant that we look at. So ammonia, basically, which is a toxic substance. So that has significantly reduced since the 1975, which is when this graph shows. Total oxidized nitrogen, so that's the nitrogen we've been talking about. So as you can see, that is a challenge. So that is rising. But the phosphate, which is the other key nutrient in relation to additional plant growth, is also dropping. And there's additional work that's being planned at the moment to try and improve that further, as there is with the nitrogen. When you look at that from the Avon's perspective, so a very similar sort of trend, even more marked with the orthophosphate, because there's been an awful lot of work, investment work, led by that investment programme that I mentioned that the EA oversees, that the water company have had to undertake to remove phosphates from their sewage treatment discharges coming into the River Avon. But nitrogen is definitely still a significant issue in all of that. We've mentioned quickly about the algal growth, so Grethleria, which is the invasive algae that's already been mentioned, and the challenge and the difficulty that's faced by the harbour in relation to that increase in what we call primary production, so that's algal growth, which then can decrease the overall habitat and ecological food web and ecological functioning of the harbour. So that is definitely a challenge, and it's one that is very much linked to those excessive nutrients, but also linked to factors like climate change, so temperature, surprisingly enough. It can also be linked to a whole range of other factors in relation to sort of global movement of invasive species like Crassularia, and therefore once they get established, how quickly they become sort of invasive in that space, given that context. Talked about bathing waters, and I know this is difficult because again I do totally hear what people are saying in relation to the exposure of being in the harbour, using the harbour, but at the moment the bathing waters that aren't designated are all on the coast, so you'll be familiar with the three of them there that are the closest to the harbour. They are all classified as excellent, so bathing water quality goes to excellent, good, satisfactory and poor, so they're the highest classification. And indeed over recent years, over the last couple of decades, there's been a lot of work, again, driven by that water company investment programme that we oversee, to put in place additional treatment at the sewage treatment works that discharge into the Stour and into the Avon, or specifically into Christchurch Harbour, to remove the bacteria. By remove, I mean sort of sterilise by using UV sterilisation. So that's trying to manage the bacterial load that's within the water. One key thing to emphasise, and I mentioned this just purely from the context of working on bathing water sites across the whole of the Wessex area, is that it's not just sewage. So bathing water, the bacteria that can cause the human health can come from agriculture. It's a very significant component in some places, and as we've already discussed, the size of the catchments draining down into Christchurch are very large. There is a lot of agriculture that happens in that space. But other factors, so birds, believe it or not. So we have an awful lot of challenges in relation to fecal matter coming from birds, roosting birds, that can also then present itself in relation to that sort of elevated bacterial concentration. But the key thing to emphasise there...
Jim, can I just push you for time in a little bit?
Yes, sorry, I'm
so we've got enough
very
time
nearly there. So,
thank you.
Water company compliance, so just talking here about the work that we've been doing. So we have been monitoring all of the assets that Wessex Water operate in around in the harbour. So over the last 18 months, we've investigated and inspected all of those, and that's a rolling programme. We haven't had any significant pollution incidents reported to us, either through water company discharges or from members of the public, but we'll continue monitoring that. In relation to that investment programme, so the key things just to say what's in the programme for the water company to do by March of 2030. So one is investigating those sources of nitrogen within the catchment. So where is that excessive nitrogen coming from? Removal of phosphorus from Christchurch sewage treatment works. So that's, I think, already been discussed. And then improvements in relation to the discharges through storm sewer overflows, combined sewer overflows and pumping stations, again, around Christchurch. And they're all programme lines that are there to have outcomes by 2030. And I'll leave it there, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Matt, I believe you've got a presentation as well.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone, and certainly very glad to be here. Thank you for inviting us, and I share a lot of the sentiments that have been expressed. My job here is to provide you with the facts of the journey we've been on and to say what we are also planning to do. So I do have a few slides. Some are a bit repetitive, so I will go through them quite quickly. I'm going to start with environmental stuff and then move on to public health. As Martin's already said, 2 huge river catchments. So just to let you know how it works, we are set discharge permits by the Environment Agency. That's a combination of flow and concentration. Together, those two make load. And so all of our treatment works get given a cubic metres per day dry weather flow permit, and we are beneath that, and then a concentration permit, and we are beneath that. You multiply the two together, and you get the environmental load. And we aim to outperform both of those individual targets. Just so you understand how we remove phosphorus, we have a lot of phosphorus permits on our upstream treatment works. We don't have any nitrogen permits. So all of our focus over the past 26 years for putting phosphorus stripping, or P stripping as we call it, have been focused on phosphorus. To get down to 1 milligram per litre discharge, that's about 80% removal of what a treatment works would achieve without phosphorus stripping. It involves chemicals, a coagulant called ferric sulfate, and to get down to further levels, down to 95% removal, we have to put in a kind of filtration rate at the back end, filtration process at the back end, as well as chemical dosing. What that does, it moves the phosphorus from the liquid to the solid. The solid then goes off for digestion and then is used as a fertilizer, and then the liquid goes into the receiving waters. The Hampshire Avon has been heavily protected and had lots of phosphorus permits for many years. What you can see there is a list of the treatment works, the river catchment, and the permit limit in milligrams per litre. And if you look at our recent discharge concentration levels, what you can see here is that every single site is outperforming its concentration permit by some margin. We're not leaving it there because our permits are being tightened. And the second to last column shows all the treatment works that are having an upgrade, i.e. a tightening of the permits, and what those permits will be tightened to. So 0.25, which dominates the right-hand column, reflects a 95% removal of phosphorus from before phosphorus stripping was put in. All that does is gives us a story of how phosphorus has been removed from the Hampshire Avon. Back in 2000, nothing was removed in end of last year. 74% of the population connected to treatment works upstream, that was being removed, which was a total of about 59% of the load. And then by 2030, the percentage of phosphorus removed will be up at 94%. What does that look like from an environmental measurement point of view? This is the monitoring point at the bottom end of the Hampshire Avon. Jim has already shared the kind of trend graph of phosphorus levels. This is orthophosphate, which is about 3 times total phosphorus in the Hampshire Avon. What I would like, I'll come on to kind of more recent improvements because that only goes up to 2024. The Dorset Stour is a river where the environmental designation has happened later than the Hampshire Avon and was only designated in 2019 as a nutrient-sensitive river. Same sort of story. We have discharge permits at all these treatment works. We also have stretch permits. These are things that we aim to do to try and outperform the permit. And again, evidence that we outperform the permit by some margin, including outperforming the stretch permit. Future work in the Stour, those ticks there, those are sites that are getting even tighter permits in this current 5-year period and the permit limit that we will be getting down to. The same story, 2015, no phosphorus was being removed. 2025, about 76% was being removed. And then by 2030, that'll increase to 86%. That big jump in 2025 was due to Holdenhurst, which is the largest treatment works on the Stour, getting treatment for phosphorus, or getting a permit for phosphorus, and then the treatment to follow. This is the monitoring point at the end of the Stour. As you can see, the reduction in the Stour is far less pronounced than in the Hampshire Avon. But what I want to do is draw your attention to the most recent data, that's 2025. That last vertical dashed line is when the phosphorus permit for Holdenhurst came in. And as you can see, the summer peak in phosphorus, which is the black dots, has completely disappeared. So that's great news. We're removing well over 100 tonnes a year of phosphorus at that last treatment works driven by the permit. We're also working upstream in the catchment with farmers because they're also contributors to phosphorus. We have a scheme whereby and this is all on our website, by the way, where we pay farmers to put in winter cover crops and other things that prevent that phosphorus from escaping into the rivers. Let me move on to public health because a lot of the talk has been about public health. And just a reminder of history, before early 1970s, all along the coast, sewage went straight out to sea 24/7 without treatment. The coastal interceptor sewer was built in the late 60s, early 70s, which took sewage inland to Holdenhurst, which meant that the continuous discharges were turned into intermittent discharges. That's the storm overflows that we have along the coast. As Jim has mentioned, the sources of E. coli and intestinal enterococci, which are the 2 indicator organisms of pathogens, can come from humans. And when they come from humans, that can come either from treated sewage, that's continuous discharges, that could be from us, That could be from privately owned treatment works or storm overflows. And other sources, obviously, as Jim's mentioned, could be bovine, avian, and others. So when we measure E. coli, what we're not doing is measuring where that E. coli is coming from. To do that, you have to have a further level of measurement called microbial source tracking, and that determines the sort of species that those E. coli being measured are coming from. Sewage works primarily are designed to protect the environment. However, where they are near designated bathing waters, we also have ultraviolet disinfection. So what we see here is a reduction in those fecal indicator organisms depending on the level of treatment, and continuously treated sewage, which is the third line there, still has many hundreds of thousands of bacteria per 100 mil. You've got to disinfect it, which is that last vertical line, in order to get down to levels that are close to bathing water standards. That's something that we have been doing over many years, and these large continuous treatment work, continuous discharges, all have ultraviolet disinfection, which has been driven by bathing water quality needs along the coast. Just expand what Jim showed, that is the state of long-term trends of bathing waters on the Bournemouth and Poole coast. Now, recognising that there's lots more talk now about fecal indicator organisms within the harbour itself, we have been doing some additional sampling. This is not driven by any legislation because none of these sites are designated, but thought it worth showing you some of our results where certain locations, when compared against Bathing Water Directive for this sampling period, which was just a random sampling period last year, many of the places are achieving excellent, some sufficient, and some good. But you can see that you can go from excellent to sufficient just within the space of a few kilometres. These are long-term trends. They're not instantaneous. Whilst they are spot samples, they don't tell you what is the water quality like now, because these are samples taken to the labs and processed through incubators and then counted. So it's quite a manual and long process. A lot of people are very concerned about storm overflows, quite rightly. These are all the storm overflows near Christchurch Harbour. The ones listed in blue are the ones that are very low spillers. The one in orange there, Holdenhurst, is where we've literally just finished a very large storage tank, so that average of 21 spills per year has dropped right down, but we only have a long-term average for history. The ones in yellow are sites that are being upgraded this current regulatory period, and the green and the dark orange are futures. So those are the number of long-term average spill counts per year that we show there, and the ones in yellow are the ones we're addressing in the next few years. This is an example of what we've just built at Holdenhurst, a 9,000 cubic metre tank to store the contaminated rain so that it doesn't discharge. That then goes back for treatment after the rainfall event. Final slide is all about measuring bacteria real time, because when you go swimming, what you want to know is what's it like now. Not easy to do. Counting invisible bacteria in real time is not easy. We've done a lot of work trying to use machine learning algorithms to measure difficult and important things, i.e. the fecal indicator organisms, but using parameters that are easy and quick to measure. And worked with BCP to develop C-Check for Boscombe and Bournemouth. These are the boys off the coast. And what they do is every 30 minutes, they give a real-time prediction of what water quality is like. And that is to support the long-term classifications that we get that the EA sample during the bathing season. So that is all the work we have done and are planning to do. I'm very happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being quick. I'm going to look at all the councillors on committee. Is everyone going to want to speak to this item? Can I just get a rough nod from people who want to? No, okay. So I'm going to ask everyone to be really quick when they do speak with your questions and that, because I would like to get, I think we're going to struggle to meet the 7:30 cut-off, but we'll try and do it as close as we can. Thank you for those presentations. There's a lot of information in there, a lot to digest, which I don't think we can really do justice in this. So I'm going to use Chair's prerogative just to ask the first question. And it's a really simple one because there's a lot there. Would you go swimming in Christchurch Harbour in summer? Would you go swimming in Christchurch Harbour in winter? to both you, Jim and Matt, knowing what you know about the water quality?
Yes.
And my response to that is, and I don't mean to make it sound like a diplomatic response of any kind, but sort of any open water, any natural water body will contain bacteria. And if you're unlucky enough to be in that water body when it happens to be present and you should ingest it, there's a risk of being unwell. And that's guidance from the UK Health Security Agency. That's not to say that sort of the bathing water regulations are there to give people informed information to try and make a decision as to, is that risk higher or lower? So it's would I go swimming in the harbour? I don't go sea swimming, I'm afraid, but sort of that's the way we would reflect on it.
Okay, thank you. Could I ask you both to turn your microphones off while the other councillors speak, and then if you need to answer a question, to put them back on? Councillor Ricketts.
Thank you, Chair. I'd really like to thank the speakers for coming tonight. You're so impassioned, and it's wonderful to have so many of you here and also to see the demonstration outside. This has been a passion of mine as well for the last 3 years since I met Martin. I'm the ward councillor for Commons, and the Stour runs through from Throop to Bailey Bridge through my ward. And I happen to live about 50 metres from the Stour. So I've got a first-hand experience of seeing what flows down there. Back in 2009, Dorset Council's Habitat Regulations Assessment identified 58 sewage treatment plants discharging into the Stour catchment. It includes many small, unregulated rural works, as well as the major plants. And all of this ends up in our harbour. And let's not forget the Avon too, making a total of 88, as Martin has said. And we can see the impact on this today in excessive algae growth causing eutrophication, fish and invertebrates dying due to this lack of oxygen. And as our fishing colleague has said, this is the diseased bass that we have seen in the harbour that's been caught. There you go, Chair. And we're seeing E. coli and interstitial enterocoli levels. Chemical contaminants from treated effluent can contain traces of pharmaceuticals, that's hormones. Personal care products, you really might not want to see this. This is a picture of sanitary towels that have washed up on Iford Golf Course. Pesticides and industrial chemicals. The protections we currently have on the harbour, SSSI and SAC, and I believe Ramsar as well, don't prohibit discharge and are clearly not achieving the desired environmental outcome. So, Jim, what do you suggest we do?
Mic on. So I believe we are doing everything we can within the framework that we operate. So sort of I mentioned around the water quality investment or water company investment programs. So the work that's gone on, as Matt's just indicated, in relation to the improvement of the treatment works. So looking at phosphate, looking at UV stripping or UV sterilisation to try and remove the bacteria. I think the challenge is the problems are large. As you said, the catchment area is very large. They are being made worse by some of the challenges around climate change. So, water resources, how much water is in the river, sea level rise, changes in what's happening in relation to tidal elements, and also the challenge around, as we've been discussing, around some of the new chemical products that we're now becoming very acutely aware are in our water systems and are coming from all of us because we use them. They end up invariably going down the loo and going towards the treatment works. And there isn't currently the legislation there to then say they need to be controlled. How do you control them? How do you manage that? Wessex Water, you now have a new permit and now says you need to regulate to that standard. And on top of that, we have the additional pressure that agriculture. So agriculture is a key factor in a lot of this in relation to some of the pollution. The farming sector is under a great deal of pressure, I think, as we'd all appreciate, trying to sort of grow and provide the food that we need. And we're trying to work in as many collective and focused ways to address all of those points. But certainly in my 35-year career of working in water industry or water quality, this is the most challenging I've seen it, because all of the really gross problems that were there, so come here 30 years ago, you would have had raw sewage discharges pretty much all along the beach. That has all massively improved, but the challenges have now grown and have become increasingly challenging, as we described. And what we're trying to do is work as hard as we can in that space of understanding, quantifying, trying to influence, but categorically regulating where we can to make sure that those who are discharging are doing it correctly. And you mentioned things like small sewage treatment works. There's an awful lot of sewage treatment works that are below that radar because they're captured through environmental health. So that would be local authority requirement to make sure that they're being policed, that their building regulations have signed them off, people are actually maintaining them. So there's that whole collective challenge of how do we come together to try and manage and protect our water going forward.
Yeah, if you want to follow on, Councillor.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, I'd like to hear what everybody else said, but I'd actually like to make a proposal at the end, if you wouldn't mind coming back to me, because I think I have a solution. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm content to do that. Any other speakers? Yeah.
It's just a quick question. Obviously, the legislation in respect of fines has recently changed, and the fines can be made for much larger amounts on much lower criteria, and that's supposed to be funding the Environment Agency. I know within the actually, I'm quite involved in the farming community. It probably won't make a huge difference to the farming community because actually, in reality, if you lose your £300 an acre CS and SFI payment, which is already monitored by DEFRA, you're looking at a 200-acre farm. That's best part of £80,000 that you're gonna lose straight off. But in terms of managing water outlets, what is the Environment Agency going to do to input, let's say, a £500,000 fine, which is your maximum fine that you can now impose to fund yourselves?
So we will always try and take cases forward. And as you mentioned, the new legislation gives us the opportunity now for things like fixed penalties fines. And some of this is recognising to go through the court process is a lengthy process. It takes a long time to do that, to get the weight of evidence, to go through the process. What the legislation is now giving is hopefully that opportunity to be able to react more quickly to lower level incidents where we feel the permit has been breached, there's been a risk or pollution to the environment, to then sort of levy that fine directly to the water company, or indeed, and again, we're talking about water companies, but that wider perspective in relation to others who may be causing that pollution.
Very, very quick follow up to that. So say these guys say, oh, we've got these figures here, you're happy to go to Basic Water and give them a 10 grand, 20 grand fine? Yeah.
So the real challenge there is legal basis of cause and effect. So if you can provide me those figures that definitively link it to just one discharge or one pipe or one malfunctioning permit, then yes, we'd most definitely look to try and use that information. But as I've said, part of the challenge in this space is it is very, very complex. There are many different factors at play, and trying to pin that down. And that's one of the reasons why the court process or collecting the information to do a prosecution takes so long, because you've got to get it right to that beyond reasonable doubt criteria.
Yeah, go on, Councillor McGill.
So just take it one step back. So we've got a guy there saying, look, we've got 400 metres up the river is a dividing point. We've got phosphate measurements here. We've got a sewage works here. 20 grand fine?
And the challenge there is at the moment is there a phosphate standard on that discharge? And that's part of what's in the water industry improvement programme at the moment in relation to delivering some of that by 2030.
Content, but maybe not happy. Councillor Canavan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm kind of hoping that Councillor Rickett's recommendation might cover my question, but one of the key themes that came through from the various organisations that spoke at the beginning of the meeting was this idea of having some kind of harbour protection policy. And I'm wanting to understand what the obstacles are for us to have one. Why can't we have one? What's stopping us? What is stopping us doing that? The two councillors talked about we could, but there's this danger of challenge through the planning regulations. Well, that may be, but it's as far as I can see, there's a two-pronged approach, isn't there? There's what we can do locally and what we need the government to do nationally in terms of strengthening regulation. So in terms of what we can do, are we able to have some kind of harbour protection policy? I'm very mindful, Chair, that tomorrow we have the first meeting of the local plan working group. So if this is something that has to be fed through that process, then please tell me, because we'll make sure it is. But if there's anything else that are, if there are any other obstacles that are in our way, be they legal or, you know, what regulatory or whatever, it would be really helpful to know. Thank you.
I think that as that's what BCP Council can do, maybe Councillor Hadley, do you want to respond to that? So Councillor Hadley is the portfolio holder for Environment at BCP Council. Councillor Hadley.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, there's lots of things right the way through. I'd love to talk about, and I have met with several of the key people who've spoken tonight, and you know, I'm pleased there is such passion for Christchurch Harbour. I learned to sail in Highcliffe Sailing Club and then Christchurch Sailing Club, and I'm now in Poole. Poole Harbour has a lot of the same problems because actually, although there are smaller rivers, they still have most of the Dorset that covers. Our challenge at the council is we have very limited responsibilities over water quality, and actually the agency that's not in the room is Natural England, and certainly in terms of that idea of having those sort of protections, it's always through Natural England. So there are partnerships involving the Environment Agency, the Water Company, and many parts of the council, because there was mention of the old dumps, the old refuse tips, of which there are several right on the edge of Christchurch Harbour. We know that's a problem. Our flooding and coastal risk team have been raising that nationally because there's no money nationally to protect those. And it's an issue, you know, it's another one of the issues in terms of the Ferrari chemicals, as the student from Bournemouth University highlighted, but also in terms of all sorts of stuff that's in those from the time when we threw everything in the ground and didn't recycle anywhere near as much as we did. So in terms of local plan, we can certainly try. There are all sorts of changes to the National Planning Policy Framework. That's not my area. That's actually the leaders. The leader covers planning. But certainly it's something we should definitely talk about in terms of that and how we can try and improve protection for Christchurch Harbour. And we, as the council, we own a lot of the land. So Sandpier Marsh was mentioned, Hainsbury Head. You know, there's a real need in terms of our stewardship and our thinking about the natural environment around the harbour, that we have a significant vested interest in working with the local residents and for the local residents in trying to protect that, but also as part of the Dorset local nature recovery plan and the local nature partnership, working with people further upstream. So I've been in meetings where people right at the head of the River Stour are really interested in the water quality and what they're doing there. But I'm also really conscious that we take, as part of our work around food waste, we take our food waste, we take out the gas and use that, and then the solids go back on the land. And so there's kind of something about the circular bit around what comes out of the sewage farms. Again, there's solids going back on the land. Is that then coming down and part of the farming problem? And so we have to think holistically. We have to think about the whole problem, and it's not just a planning problem, but it's all sorts of other parts of the council, but way beyond. And we are a small part, unfortunately, in this. Sorry, that's a long answer.
That's fine. Jim or Matt, do you want to add anything from your experience to Councillor Hadley's answer?
Probably nothing more to add, I don't think so.
Okay, Councillor Canavan, are you happy with that? I've got Councillor Rice next, who's joined us on Teams online. Councillor Rice.
Thank you. Yes, I would like to show appreciation for all of the speakers that have come. It's really, really helpful and very, very important. From a personal point of view, as a councillor, I'm happy to state that I'm very happy to support as much action as possible that I can bring about within the council. However, my experience of being on the council so far for 8 years is that there are very limited funding, which I'm sure you're aware of. And if the work is non-statutory, then it's very difficult for the council to be proactive. And I think that's what we heard in the conversation last year in terms of adding something into the work plan. However, it would be interesting to know whether the public organisations could do some work themselves in the community, sort of pay a planning consultant to do the work that they could then be submitted to the council. Now, we've been presented with an awful lot of information, so I don't know whether this is possible or not, but it's just to give a sort of a reality of the situation of BCP Council in terms of our limitations, I suppose. Although as far as I'm aware, most councillors really, really want to be able to protect Christchurch Harbour more. And it just sort of leads me to thinking about the River Wye, very highly publicised, and a lot of public actions to raise awareness about that. And I personally would support actions to promote the issues. And just seeing the images of the fish, I previously worked in the NHS, and to see sort of obvious deformities on an animal shows extensive disease. And I'm sure that, yes, it's just to think of the amount of undiagnosed disease and unobserved disease that's going on must be heartbreaking to see as people that have experienced the harbour going on. Yeah, I just wanted to make that statement. And also, if there's anything that isn't covered in the meeting today and any suggestions going forwards, then you can also email all of us councillors. But I'm sure Vanessa is linked into you all. So that's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. I think there was more of a statement than anything, but I think the one thing that I'll pick up on that you said is whether the community groups, which have had a lot of response, can get more involved or help in ways towards putting in a protection policy if the council was minded to do something like that. Councillor Hadley, is that something which community groups could potentially get involved in?
I think the work, particularly Martin Stewart referred to the work they're doing is really valuable. I think the other really important thing is the bit about getting the water quality, the waters accepted as bathing quality water. And the legislation did change last year, and I was trying communicate with Martin to get to understand how we could get, because it's not just about swimming anymore, it is about all water users. So that means the paddleboarders, the sailors, all the people that are on and in the water. I don't know actually whether there's anything we can get from in terms of whether that's moved on to allow us to actually highlight that the many people are passionate about this for Christchurch Harbour, getting it designated so that the Environment Agency will have a duty to monitor and inside the harbour would be really valuable. Is there anything we could ask perhaps the Environment Agency on that?
Yeah, I think I'll just go quickly to Councillor Ricketts as well, because I think you said there's something already in the works.
Thank you. I'd just like to point out that 18 months ago, CHAMS paid for a planning consultant to produce a Christchurch Harbour protection policy. And I actually emailed that to you on the day that I presented the petition with 2,000 signatures. So you've all got that. That all came to you from me and to officers as well. And that was the basis of what we were hoping, that a harbour protection policy would be developed by this council. So that you've already got that.
Yeah, apologies, as I say, planning is not in my remit, but I will take them up.
Thank you. Any more? Yeah, Councillor Goodall.
Just a quickie. Could you just tell me the relationship between the Environment Committee and Environment Agency and MMO? Because are not MMO responsible for the triple SIs in the harbour?
So it's, unfortunately, it's a little more complicated. So sort of things already been mentioned. So Natural England is the lead government body, so another DEFRA agency like the Environment Agency. But we've been talking about fisheries within the harbour. So fisheries are then regulated by IFCA, so the Inshore Fisheries Conservation Agency that is responsible, or authority rather, that is responsible for fisheries. And then the MMO is looking more at marine management in the wider sense. So to a degree, some licensing, but the environmental aspect will sit primarily between ourselves, the Natural England, and the IFCA.
Just make the point that, of course, the MMO do sit on CIFCA.
And we have very close links with the IFCA as well. So some of my staff are co-warranted with IFCA, so they work very closely together.
Yeah, Councillor Moriarty.
Hi, this is a query, and forgive my ignorance, it's not my area of expertise at all. But you did say about reporting, that perhaps people aren't reporting as much as they ought to be. What impact would it make if people reported more?
And so it's certainly not one to chastise anyone for not reporting, but the point being, I always make the analogy, it's a bit like Citizens Watch. If you've got lots of eyes and lots of ears who are picking up on things that look unusual, suspicious, or indeed some kind of gross pollution, that gives us the weight of evidence to then drive our investigatory work, to drive, do we need to do more inspections in relation to water company assets? Do we need to go out and put boots on the ground to understand what's happening out there? So it is very much it's intelligence gathering that we use. We may not be able to respond to every single incident, but what we will do is use that to build an overall picture of, right, we think there's an issue here that warrants us now investigating and putting resource into that place.
Okay. And do you think that there's something that you could do to kind of encourage people to report more, so that if they're aware that the more reporting that they do, then the more likelihood that there'll be an intervention?
Yes, and well, we try to publicise it as much as we can, and as I said, it has now gone to an online tool as well, so you can do it sort of through a website or through your phone, or you can do it the old-fashioned way of just phoning. But every opportunity, please do. And again, if in any doubt, look at environmentagency.gov.uk. You'll see the details there. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think if we can capture that number in the website in the minutes as well, and we'll make sure that it's included there. Any more speakers, or can I go back to Councillor Ricketts? You said you wanted to make a proposal.
Thank you. I've tried to capture a lot of the things that the members of the public have said tonight. And I think what is needed is a robust harbour protection plan with a presumption of no net deterioration, planning policies requiring new developments to achieve nutrient neutrality or better, council land management practices that reduce pesticides and fertilisers, regular monitoring and public reporting, support for wetland creation and river restoration projects, and partnership commitments with our water companies, with our Environment Agency, and with neighbouring councils, which I think is most important. Christchurch Harbour needs to be made a material consideration in every relevant council decision on, for example, drainage, flood risk, recreation, highways, and development. Yes, it's ambitious, but if BCP want to be taken seriously as a national leader in environmental protection, it needs to adopt a policy with an overarching objective to restore and maintain Christchurch Harbour in favourable ecological condition by ensuring that all council decisions contribute to improved water quality, reduced pollution, and enhanced biodiversity, applying the precautionary principle where there is uncertainty. And we need this now. So it can be embedded into the developing local plan. So I would like to recommend to Cabinet that they expedite the development of a robust harbour protection policy, as I've outlined, and has been circulated previously to all members of council and officers, and to lobby central government, as suggested by Councillor Nanovo and Councillor Richardson, to improve protection through the MPPF.
And do you have a seconder for that? Councillor Goodall. And can I also ask you to send us that in writing so we can capture it? Because I know Rebecca's going to ask me afterwards, so we've got that in full. Okay, so we've heard the proposal. Could you just repeat it again so everyone hears just that final summary, please, Councillor Richards?
Yeah, it's a harbour protection policy with the overarching objective to restore and maintain Christchurch Harbour in favourable ecological condition by ensuring that all council decisions contribute to improved water quality, reduced pollution and enhanced biodiversity, applying the precautionary principle where there is uncertainty, and that Cabinet expedite the development of a robust harbour protection policy, as I've outlined, and to lobby central government, as suggested by our ward councillors, to improve protection through the MPPF.
Thank you very much. Committee.
I'll send it to you, Rebecca.
Committee, have we got any debate on that? Yeah, of course, Councillor Gillett.
So in terms of that, the legislation you're using for to put that through is effectively the local plan. Yeah, so basically putting in the local plan. What is, I guess, biodiversity net gain? Yeah, which is to some extent, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that'd be for the local planning group to decide. Any further debate? Councillor Hadley.
yes, obviously it's for the committee to propose and for a cabinet to respond. But if I may just reflect that a huge amount of this, as we've heard from the Environment Agency and from Wessex Water, sits outside our boundaries upstream. So most of Dorset, most of Wiltshire, and the western side of Hampshire. So there is kind of something about how we can get others to engage in it. I think there's definitely something about the water catchment partnerships and how we can work with them, how we work with other planning authorities, and how we can work with the national statutory agencies and DEFRA in terms of their responsibilities. And so a lot of that is more about the lobbying than what we can directly control. So we're inheriting a lot of this water already in a bad state. There's something about what we can do, what Wessex Water can do in our own patch. But it's a much wider issue than that. But sorry, that's just by way of concern about the limitations of what we can do as BCP alone.
Thank you, Matt.
Councillor Ricketts, I'd like to offer our support to developing such policy. I think I'd like to add, as well as precautionary principles, source control principles. I spend a lot of time trying to explain to government that tackling problems downstream is ineffective and unsustainable. When we tackle storm overflows, we tackle them in an unsustainable way by storing contaminated rain and then treating it. We need to tackle the rain at source. Government understands this for things like PFAS, but doesn't quite get it for raindrops. When it comes to new development, our national planning policy framework ignores this natural resource landing on each property. Developers ignore it because they don't have to deal with it. But not only do we have a problem of too much water when it rains, but we have a problem of too little water when it doesn't rain. And yet, all the new development we build, we're filling toilet systems with drinking water, which is madness. We are trying to tackle storm overflows by storing the rain rather than stopping the rain getting in the sewers in the first place. What we need is a joint effort to lobby for source control principles so that when we invest money, we can invest it in the right place rather than the wrong place. And the right place is where the problem occurs. For storm overflows, that's our highways and properties, because that's where the rain is added to sewers. For things like PFAS, it's much broader and much more difficult. That's where we need source control principles to stop manufacturing PFAS in the first place. There's very little we can do with it when it gets to us. There is no technology around that can deal with this stuff. We need source control principles as human beings to live sustainably on this planet.
Did I hear then, if we were to add source control principles to that, a willingness to work with BCP Council to develop something? Is that acceptable, that you'd want to add that word in as well? Source control principles in there? Okay. Any further debate, committee? Yes, Jim.
Just very quickly, just pick up on that challenge around the fact it's the catchments, and I would really encourage talking to, as you're probably aware, the catchment partnership. So there's a Dorset Catchment Partnership, there's a Hampshire Avon Catchment Partnership, and they were set up by DEFRA very much as being that forum where you can try and have that holistic conversation about how do we manage this collectively. And again, we've got links you probably have links to, and if you don't, then very happy to provide those across.
Thank you. Anything else from anyone on this item? In that case, I think we can go to a vote on the proposal from Councillor Ricketts and seconded by Councillor Goodall. So we can just do that by a show of hands if from everyone on the committee who's willing to put that forward. And that is unanimous. Thank you very much. Is there anything further on this item? Any other questions from committee members? Okay, great. Just to explain to the members of the public what's just happened there, because I know sometimes council processes can get very confusing, and it took me about 6 years of being a councillor to even understand half of it. This committee, the Environment and Place Overview and Scrutiny Committee, cannot create policy that BCP Council is going to follow. What we can do is make recommendations, and that's recommendations to the Cabinet, which is the decision makers within BCP Council, which then has any decisions over a certain level, which is then ratified by full council. So this will be a recommendation from the Environment and Place Overview and Scrutiny Committee to Cabinet that they should develop the policy as being described here and start working with the partners to do that. So that'll get taken to probably the next Cabinet meeting, which I think is Wednesday coming. So that's where that'll go. We will also feed back on this item to full council because that is where the original petition came to full council. So we will feed back everything we've discussed tonight, or at least a brief summary of it, and recommend that this is watched by full council as well, so everyone understands exactly what we're doing. And on this item, we also, as Councillor Canavan said, this is going to the local plan working group. The local plan will be looked at by the overview and scrutiny board, and we will also feed back to them as well to say that this is something which we have recommended. So that will get shared throughout all of our colleagues. The only thing left for me to do on this item is thank everyone for coming in. First of all the members of the public, all the people who signed a petition, everyone who got this to this point here. We really appreciate it, so we can actually have this discussion and this debate tonight, and I hope you've all found it really worthwhile. Jim and Matt, thank you very much for coming in and giving up your evening to come and talk to us, and hopefully we can do it again sometime in the future and report some better news as well. But for now, we will take a brief 5-minute break of this committee. Everyone who wants to go home, please do so. Please, committee members, can you stay? And we'll reconvene in 5 minutes to discuss the local transport plan. Thanks very much. everyone, and welcome back. We are moving on to item 8 on our agenda tonight, which is the local transport plan. This item is going to be introduced by Councillor Hadley, Amy Beasley, Richard Pincroft, and Councillor Herrick. I see you sneaked in as well, so it's all good. And Alexis as well. Sorry, I haven't got your name on my paper. So, Councillor Hadley, I'm going to hand over to you first to introduce this paper.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the fourth iteration of the local transport plan, which is a shared document that we've developed with Dorset Council. It's been worked up since March 2023, and it's been quite a long process. So this is a 15-year plan. We have had 3 15-year plans before this, and it's a continuation of that work. There was consultation engagement back in January to March 2024, which was looking at issues and opportunities. And we had 3,434 responses to that. We also had a transportation conference that we invited members of council, but also members of lots of businesses to debate the long-standing conundrum. I've lived in the conurbation most of my life, and it's always been a challenge to get around the area, not least because of our history and our geography. We then set up a cross-party working group with representatives from all the different parties of the council, and the deputy chair of this meeting was one of the members of that group, they've been meeting regularly throughout the process to support the work and to quiz the team on progress. Just a draft report, and between August and October of last year, we had a further consultation, which saw over 16,000 people viewed the link, but we had 1,414 responses to that. In April 2026, we had national guidance, which is long overdue. We were waiting for national guidance on what the Department for Transport expected to be in the local transport plan, because it is a statutory document that we have to do. And because of a lot of careful work by the team, we only had 3 minor amendments we had to make. 2 of those were in relation to mentioning national initiatives that they would expect to find in our document, and we made sure that those were added to the document. We had the context, but not the specific wording. There are a number of appendices to your document. I apologise, it's pretty much 500 pages you've had to read for tonight. But there's the 15-year strategy, and then a 5-year implementation plan for the first 5 years. And if you think back, for the last 5 years, we didn't have the shared barrel scheme available. We didn't have electric vehicle charging points. We didn't have the concept of autonomous vehicles. And so in 5 years' time, the world will have moved on. There will be things coming along that we haven't yet got, or we haven't yet thought about, that we'll have to look at. So it's important that the implementation plan is flexible enough to be able to change as the needs and means by which people travel around changes going forward. Although some things like walking and cycling have been around for a very long time and continue to be of value. There's also a significant, Annex 3 is about monitoring and evaluation, and that's looking through a number of lenses at how we can try and make sure that we are on track, that we are delivering the aims of the target. I should say that although I'm introducing the item, sitting next to me is Councillor Herrick. Councillor Herrick has responsibility for particularly road safety and also parking strategies. So within the local transport plan, as with many things, actually we seem to do a bit of a double act on some of these things, but those are his areas. So as I said, it's a statutory requirement to have a local transport plan. It complements our work on the local plan. Dorset Council coordinated the timelines of their local plan and local transport plan were consulted on together. We were originally running ahead on our local plan, which wasn't a great place to be because we hadn't got our transport plan in place to be able to inform the local plan process. That obviously failed. We're now restarting the local plan, so that will be informed by the local transport plan if it's assuming it's adopted. It is our prime route to getting government funding, and in paragraph 32 it highlights that our consolidated local transport settlement will need an implementation plan delivered to Department for Transport by September, and the implementation plan from this is the core of that. If it's not actually the document, it will be many of the things that need to go in that plan. There are key elements around sustainability, public health and equalities to every decision the council makes. Again, those are 3 separate appendices, but there are some really key elements in terms of transportation around sustainability agenda, the public health active travel agenda, and equality is making sure that our transport meets the needs of all our residents and not just those with the ability to pay for them. The consultation came out with a wide range of views. There was a higher feedback from older people, really interesting feedback from younger people, and we had the first of our public statements this evening was from a member of Youth Parliament, and clearly they feel that the transport system doesn't really work very well for them, and she very eloquently covered that for you tonight. But also issues for women and girls that we need to be very aware of, people with disabilities, people on lower incomes. A significant risk that's highlighted is the forthcoming strategic authorities. The Heart of Wessex, effectively, particularly strategic transport is a power that would probably transfer to a strategic authority. But obviously having an up-to-date local transport plan enables us to be clear about what we need in our area and shared with Dorset, so that if that transfers up a level, then this document will very much inform that process going forwards. So in summary, it's a vision for 15 years, increasing transport choice, reducing congestion, improving quality and condition of our infrastructure, and a big part of the spend is on existing infrastructure, on potholes and surfacing of roads and looking after bridges. But we've got to also concentrate on safety, health, accessibility, connectivity, travel experience, and reducing pollution. And the competing demand, this is always also the highway is also the means by which many of our utilities get around. Underneath the highway, a lot of our roadworks are because our utilities are failing, but actually the highways are also there to get water and gas to your house, to get the sewage away, to try and make sure it doesn't mix up with rainwater and as we had in just the previous thing. But that's also another challenge. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Herrick. Do you want to add anything at this point?
Yeah. At this point, no.
And any of the officers with us want to add anything at the moment? In which case, I'll look to the committee. Any questions from councillors? Councillor Canavan.
So, I've been looking at the implementation plan and trying to envisage, trying to visualize a situation of what bits of this we can do when. Now, I can see what it says in the appendix, but there are actually no pounds. There's just pound signs and no actual figures. So my question really is about there's clearly a long list of things that we could do with the money, and other things that we could do if we get more money. But what I can't see, and I may not be looking at it properly, is there a priority list of stuff we can do tomorrow? Slight exaggeration, but stuff we could do really quickly now, and stuff that we might have to wait to get some more money on before we could do it. Is that a really daft question?
Who wants to pick that up? Councillor Hadley, to start.
I'll start and then I'll pass over to Richard, if I may. So obviously this is a continuation of where we've already been, and each February we have, as part of our setting of budgets, we also have to accept the grant from government, which is now the Consolidated Transport Grant, and that breaks down and tries to spread across our priorities. So the implementation plan equally highlights our priorities. We can't. It's not all about what we can do instantly, but it's about how we can try and juggle and balance those pieces. But I'll pass over to Richard perhaps for a little bit more detail. But before I do, sorry, the other thing is we were previously in a situation where we were bidding for funding, and so we would bid, and we were quite successful in bidding things like Transform Control, but also Active Travel England. We managed to get some discretionary money from government. That is less of a thing now. And our challenge probably is more that the money is going to devolved authorities to spend, but particularly the mayoral strategic authorities. So what discretionary money we might get, we really don't know. So the rate at which we'd be able to work our way down this is probably constrained somewhat by how a government going to plan to give areas that are not yet mayoral authorities additional monies, and we don't have the answer to that. Thank you.
bridges?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very, very good question, very pertinent question. And obviously, what I would say is it's not just down to the council having funding for those deliverables. Obviously, there's a lot of other partners that are in those areas as well. For example, there's a freight strategy in terms of trying to transfer more freight from the port via rail. So that's really about, you know, the working with the Western Gateway, our subnational transport body, linking with the DFT and trying to lever in funding for those types of initiatives from pots that aren't currently allocated to BCP. But it's really about obviously having a really strong evidence base and a really clear plan in place to make that more of a likelihood, if you like, or more something that's actually going to happen. A lot of it is within our gift as well. So we are, as Councillor Hadley stated, each year we take a report to Cabinet and through Council, which sets out our planned expenditure from our local transport consolidated fund, which includes obviously an active travel fund element, a bus service improvement plan, sorry, a local authority bus grant has been rebranded as now to deliver our bus service improvement plan. There's also other elements linked to our structural maintenance as well. So there's a whole combination of factors, but what we really are keen to do is just set out what our plan, what our strategy is. The pound signs in there, there's obviously no actual figures stated in for all the elements, just to give you an idea of the scale, you know, obviously just the high, medium and the low level. So there is more information behind it, and we will bring that obviously, as Councillor Hadley alluded to, it's actually by October, they've extended the deadline now, the DFT. We have to submit a 5-year local transport delivery plan to the Department for Transport. So we'll be setting out very clearly what we plan to invest the money that is allocated to BCP by that date. We'll also be highlighting to the DFT, you know, where there's opportunities for external funding to come in. And just to give another example, since you know, we've produced this document, government has launched a thing called the Structures Fund, another funding stream to replace large scale assets. So at the moment we're working on a business case linked to Tuckton Bridge. So obviously that's an asset that's post reinforced concrete, post tensioned reinforced concrete. So it appears to be perfectly stable, appears to be perfectly sound when you paddleboard underneath it, or if you get underneath it and you look at the structure. But the reality is that the steel membranes inside that are tensioned are obviously degrade over time. There's obviously a 13-ton weight limit on that bridge at the moment. So in time that will fail. So we're just currently building a business case for that. In terms of the reason I'm referring to that is it's not always clear to us what opportunities are going to evolve from government, but it's just about having that clear strategy and plan in place, you know, and taking in opportunities that we can. We've obviously been very successful with, you know, in recent history with Transforming Cities Fund, with challenge funds, with obviously active travel funds. So we're just trying to, as I say, set it out, proceed.
Yeah,
that's really helpful. Can I give you a small example? So if we take school crossings, for example, you know, that's been all over us like a rash, hasn't it, in terms of the council in recent times. But there's nothing in there that tells me how much. So what I'm trying to understand really is, if you take that as just a small example, how can we make sure that you know, that is anywhere near the top of our priority list? And are we clear about how much it would cost? And are we clear about how many school crossings we would do if we had the money?
So that was all set out in the medium-term financial plan that was approved at February 2024 council. So it clearly sort of states that we'll use capital funding to upgrade sites where necessary. At the moment, we're upgrading circa 7 sites per year to achieve the MTFT target of about £35,000 per year. So we're investing using the capital allocated to us from central government to upgrade those school crossing patrol sites. The cost of them actually varies on a site-by-site basis. And obviously they need careful assessment to make sure that when we do walk away from any site, that obviously we leave as safe as potentially possible environment, you know, so it's a bit variable. So I would suggest that, you know, quite a straightforward, simple site where it's a straight road, you know, and we go to install, say, a zebra crossing, that could cost between 70 and £100,000. More complex sites might need more measures to be installed to bring them forward. But, you know, we can't shy away from the fact that actually installing those crossings actually is an upgrade, and it is actually providing pedestrians and cyclists with a crossing facility 24/7, 365 days a year, as opposed to just limited periods during sort of term time. And a lot of the locations actually in the, well, sorry, I wouldn't say a lot, but several of the locations where we've got patrollers at the moment are actually part of our local cycling and walking infrastructure plan. So, for example, Kinson Road, you know, the top end of Kinson Road, there's a school crossing patrol that operates there at the moment. Actually, that is a high priority with the local cycling and walking infrastructure plan for pedestrian crossing to go in to just serve the public 24/7. So when we're upgrading that site, that's actually something that's a high priority for funding in any instance. And similarly, you know, if I looked at other locations across, you can work out for yourself where, you know, the demand is being derived during those school peak periods, but actually there's demand 24/7 now, and especially with the emergence of breakfast clubs and after school clubs and holiday clubs at these schools as well. These children and parents aren't served at those extremities of the day. They're only served when there's a patroller there for a limited time period.
Councillor Hadley.
Yeah, I suppose a key thing to mention is the local transport plan is around capital. There has within the consolidated fund and certainly the Active Travel England fund, there has been a little bit of revenue to enable the capital to be properly spent. So money that's recognised is going to be for project management and those sorts of things. But it is for capital spend, not for ongoing revenue. And our ongoing revenue gets squeezed because a lot of the services that we run are not statutory in this area. So that's part of the reason for that conversion.
I've got Councillor Edwards next online.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask, because obviously of the recent news about Brittany Ferries pulling out of the Port of Poole, are we having talks with the Poole Harbour Commissioners about the future of the port? Because obviously the Barfleur used to take the people from here over to France and vice versa, and presumably there was freight as well. So I just wondered how much of an impact this is going to have on the Port of Poole and part of this local transport plan.
Thanks, Councillor Edwards. Councillor Hadley.
Thank you. Yes, we actually met with the Harbour Commissioners last week, and colleagues, the officers and I, with people from the Department of Transport. And two things there. One was the Barfleur is a significant loss to them, and not just the loss of the Barfleur, but the loss of the route to Cherbourg. It's a loss to people in Poole. I used to go on twinning with Cherbourg, so the two towns twinning together is a real challenge. They are very actively looking at other people to fill the void, to see if there's someone else that would undertake that route. There is still the ferries to the Channel Islands and on to St Malo, but it is a real loss to the town. In terms of the local transport plan, it doesn't really affect the local transport plan directly, except that part of the mitigation, I guess, that the Harbour Commissioner is looking at is they're very keen on the rail link, which we're very keen on because it would remove a lot of HGVs from the road. They are looking to expand in various areas, but particularly CEMEX, the aggregates. That was a project that was the reason why they were trying to get the port link up and running, but they have other possibilities. So they have their feelers out to try and replace that income really with other sources and use the estate. Brittany Ferries occupy quite a lot of the footprint of the port, so that area potentially becomes available to them to use in other ways, and they're keen to obviously have our support in that.
So conversations ongoing. Thank you. Councillor Moriarty.
Thank you. Looking through the whole plan, which I appreciate is huge, I could see very, very little about noise pollution. It mentioned that actually noise pollution is an issue, but absolutely nothing to mitigate it. And I know so many residents along the Wessex Way, for instance, find that noise is a really big problem. And I'm just wondering, is there any plan to kind of support mitigating the noise that is in probably lots of different areas?
Who wants to pick that up? Is that your hand, Councillor Hadley? Yeah.
Well, I'll start and somebody might help me. So a couple of things, I suppose. Partly that noise monitoring is within environmental protection, so that's just a different part of the council. I'm really keen on street trees and on trying to improve that aspect, partly for a climate perspective, from a air quality and from a noise absorption perspective. And I think there's more that we could be doing there. Certainly in continental Europe, they have a lot more screens on major roads that in the urban area to deflect sound. But it's a cost to that. And I think it's something that would probably be at a scheme level. If we got to looking at a scheme where we'd improve a road, it's a consideration that we could give, but it's not something that is in there as a specific scheme at present.
Councillor Moriarty, are you content with that?
Absolutely fine. Can I ask one more question?
Of course you can.
That's okay. These key performance indicators 1 and 2 talk about emissions and air control. We're only actually monitoring very small areas. Is that going to increase? You know, I know you've got set areas where you actually monitor those things, but certainly I know a lot of people who feel that actually it needs to be more widespread. And I'm just wondering if there's going to be a plan to do that more thoroughly.
Councillor Hadley, is that you? Because I did notice that as well. I think there was something like 4% excess deaths or something like that was listed in the report. I can't remember the exact figure now, but due to poor air quality.
It's a really important issue. I will hand over to Richard in a minute, but again, public health is the lead on a lot of that within the council. And so public health have been doing a lot of work with schools and supporting through some of our schools and working with the Walk Wheel Cycle Trust. But Richard can probably tell you more.
I was just going to iterate the same comment really. I mean, obviously we link very closely with our colleagues across the council. Again, they work in a different directorate, the same directorate that deals with noise. So yeah, I can't speak for them tonight on how much they're going to enhance that, but obviously open to have conversations with them and assist them with it. Sorry, it's not a comprehensive answer, but
okay. Well, I can't see any hands. I'll go for a second. First thing is just to highlight Polly's contribution earlier, the Member of Youth Parliament. I think there was something really vital just in the first paragraph there, which was 3 out of 4 of BCP's Members of Youth Parliament were elected after campaigning for cheaper, better and more reliable public transport. And I think that's really key. We spend a lot of time looking at ways that we can increase active travel, increase the use of public transport, reduce the number of car journeys. I think it's reducing it down to 50% of journeys taken by car, others by other means. I can't remember offhand what it is. And we always look at ways that we can get people out of cars, but if we're not putting them into cars in the first place and providing a good, cheap, connected public transport system, then that is vital. I did see some bits to that with the transport hubs, with parking for bikes and that, but a lot of it seemed to be Dorset based in a lot of the towns there. So are there any plans for BCP in these sort of interconnected transport hubs with public transport and active transport?
So we have an enhanced bus quality partnership, and we've had a number of fairly robust conversations with them about school travel. And it's difficult because it's a revenue hit on the council, and again, it's something that's not statutory. So we did have to make some savings in that area last year, but we kept some of the school buses going. But we've also been talking with them about the inequality, about the costs for children to get to school, and Polly mentioned the costs of getting to school. And part of that was for them to accept the sorts of ways in which they've made it cheaper for adults, which was initially the app. And then we got to mobile phones in schools, and we've now gone back to a credit card. So credit to Moorbus, they have listened to our concerns. They came with a proposal that did cut the cost for a term pass via the app, and then have developed it to being on a card. But part of that is about boarding times. It's about not delaying all the traffic behind the bus by having people coming on quickly and not handling small change. So they're keen on non-cash methods because it keeps the bus to time and keeps the congestion. But in the bus quality partnership, and I don't know whether anyone, Alexis, perhaps might be able to give us any more information on that.
Thank you, Councillor Hadley. Specifically, in the implementation plan, we do have a scheme to support discounted or reduced price travel for school children,
and we are working with the bus company as to how that could operate. And similarly, we are looking at the mobility hubs, which is the BCP equivalent of the Dorset schemes, where we are integrating as much high frequency public transport with active travel and other options, so people have the ability to travel by whichever mode they need at that time in certain areas of BCP.
Yeah, just to add, we kind of naturally already have those interchanges. When you think about, for example, Poole railway station, obviously you're only a few hundred meters away from the bus station. There's also a car club. There's also, which is an electric car club or a hybrid car club. There's also Beryl Bays. So we've already got these. And when you, even if you go sort of across the conurbation, I could move from west to east and bore you all to death, so I won't extend it. But, you know, if you go to Poole and Bournemouth College, you know, the Poole campus near the old Poole Civic Centre, again, there's a car club there. There's a bus interchange there. There's a Beryl bike share there. So I guess it's not as, we're not, maybe we're not selling it as much as Dorset are perhaps, but we already have these. It's just long established. It's kind of the norm across BCP, I would suggest already. And obviously we've got a huge rollout of on-street electric vehicle chargers that are coming as well, which should help air quality, just coming back to the previous point that was made. And also we've got plans, we're currently liaising with Moorbus in regards to their depot locations and trying to electrify their fleets. We've got new electric buses arriving this autumn to work around Poole Town Centre initially, to sort of trial it locally. And then hopefully we can, you know, work with them to come up with some medium-term plans to actually, you know, around their accommodation strategy for their buses, and make sure, you know, that we secure sites with them so that they can install the infrastructure to, you know, facilitate electric buses across BCP. So that would obviously be a huge benefit in terms of air quality as well. Councillor Harriott.
So I just thought I'd come back to, we already have through the bus partnership, £2 area-wide day riders for under 18s through the weekends, which is obviously kind of being funded through that the bus service improvement partnership. I think what's really interesting is that the government have backed free travel for 5 to 15-year-olds this summer as well on buses. It'll be really interesting to see how the outcome of that, and whether it maybe leads to further movement in that direction. Because I think we would probably need some government funding and adjustments to.
I would just add as well, yeah, the obviously under 19s as well. Obviously, travel for childcare locally on Moorbus as well, which is obviously a very good offer. Sorry to interject.
Thank you. I'm gonna have one more question from me, and then I've got 3 more speakers, which is Councillor Goodall, then Ricketts, then Gillett. So my final question, completely different thing. The airport's mentioned in the transport plan a few times. I didn't realise until I read it that it's in the top 20 busiest in the UK, which I find it absolutely unbelievable that a top 20 airport has 2 buses running to it a day, which don't coincide with any of the flights going from there, leaving the only option for many people across BCP and Dorset and further afield to drive and be dropped off at a extortionate charge. There's now a nice new footpath which runs to the airport, so there's people being dropped off across the road on what is a pretty dangerous junction to then cross and go to the airport at all around the same time. Yet there's nothing in the transport plan to address how we're going to link up getting people to the airport in a more sustainable way. So why isn't there, and what can we be doing working with our partners in the buses and at the airport as well? Councillor Hadley.
I'll start and I'll pass this on to Alexis, I think. So the planning consent the Christchurch Borough Council had for the airport expansion back in 2009, I think it was, included an alley bus, and they've chosen not to continue that. I think one of the key things with the airport is that the big volumes is their staff and people working in the industrial parks. Is our biggest industrial area in the conurbation, and it sits outside the conurbation. But Airport Park East and Airport Park West. Cabinet had an opportunity to go up to the airport. We did challenge them on the bus a few weeks ago. We did challenge them specifically on the bus and why they couldn't look at potentially cross-subsidising from their extortionate car park fees to help to fund to ensure there is an alley bus. They are doing an evaluation report, I think is the response. But again, Alexis may be able to give you more.
Yes, public transport access to the airport is difficult. There are a total of 5 bus journeys there. You've got 2 in the morning, 3 in the afternoon returning from the airport. So they don't necessarily coincide with shift patterns at the business parks or the airline schedules. So it is very difficult to get to the airport by public transport. And we are working with the owners of the airport to improve that, to better align it as far as possible. We do have a scheme listed in the implementation plan looking at access to the airport in the holistic sense of how you can get there by public transport, walking, cycling, if that is an option for you, as well as car travel, because it is very closely located to BCP, but I think we all recognise that it could be improved in terms of how you get there. It is correct, it is one of the busiest airports. I think it's number 18 in the country now in terms of numbers. However, the other airports obviously have a lot larger number of passengers. I think they're all clustered together, sort of 10 or so airports, and then the Heathrows and Bristols of the world are much more numbers. You know, Bournemouth Airport has about 1.4 million passengers per year, which is, relatively speaking, low numbers per day travelling to the airport for their journeys aboard. Richard, did you want to say anything?
I think you've covered it. I mean, but just anecdotally, we were talking to the airport earlier today on this very same matter and working with them to resolve it, basically.
Thank you. Half of me just wants to say, just get some land and build a cheaper car park next door and run a bus to it, but I'll leave that. Councillor Goodall.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 3 questions, if I may. Can we make buses sexy? Because, well, actually, somebody else said that, not me. But at the moment, what we're doing, it seems to me, and forgive my amateur interpretation of what's going on, we're putting in a whole lot of chargers for electric cars that are going to be used for charging a whole pile of huge SUVs. And we haven't done anything, or at least I can't find anything about park and ride for Moorbus. And shouldn't we be prioritising that so at least we can start getting people onto buses, hence the sex reference? And so, because if you've got a car, the convenience is wonderful, but if you've got park and ride, and I think we've raised this with Councillor Herrick before, there's a park and ride in Poole, on the outskirts of Poole, that's got another business sat on it at the moment. So can I first ask, are we talking to Moorbus about park and ride?
So, I mean, we've obviously attempted to operate park and ride several times seasonally in recent years. So, you know, most recently, I think was 2023 or 2024. So we obviously operated a park and ride from Kings Park down to Boscombe for the high season. That cost us actually about £60,000 to operate it. There wasn't any revenue to cover that. So that was accounting for the revenue that we got from people that were travelling on using that park and ride service as well. So it's not commercially viable. Obviously, it's not going to help anybody if we suddenly start operating buses and driving them around empty because nobody's using them, because there's obviously more conveniently available parking in town centres. So, you know, in terms of town centre of Poole, for example, there is very clearly through studies that have been undertaken and other committees that have taken place, you know, there's a surplus of car parking. So until that's addressed, a park and ride isn't going to be a viable option. I'm sure Moorbus would very much welcome that conversation. But at the moment, there's just not commercially viable. I think this has been debated at a number of different forums. In fact, it might have even been debated at this very forum itself not so long ago. Councillor Herrick, did you want to?
Yeah, I do feel like this is a tradition every time I enter this room that we get to talk about park and ride. I think the challenge we have, I think Richard's laid out really well, but essentially to make park and rides work, you need the parking environment beyond those park and rides to be essentially more expensive and more sparse. to get people onto the park and rides, that would need higher parking charges and probably less of it, which people are very resistant to, and create a challenge, or to find another way to subsidise that. I know that around the country, the mayoral authorities are using some of it to subsidise. In Oxford, they're using a congestion charge or a gate to do that. So there are different ways of funding it and operating it. But the other thing about park and ride is that most people need a car to get there in the first place and have to be coming from outside. And a lot of the journeys in the BCP area are generated from within BCP itself. So therefore, they would have to travel out to travel back in, and I think that creates obviously a very different kind of challenge. The other one is that to make that park and ride kind of quick into town is that you need to introduce quite a lot of bus gates and bus restrictions as well. So that really needs to be carefully thought through. I think the issue at Poole is purely underuse with a lot of parking beyond. But for the wider area, there's a lot going on in park and ride world, but always happy to talk about it.
Councillor Hartley.
Yeah, I think partly, as Richard said, a lot of the people originate in the conurbation. For me, it's let's do the ride and forget about the parking. You know, there is something about how do we encourage. I'm not sure I'd follow your suggestion about what we do with buses, but how do we make buses more attractive to be used more rather than people getting in the car in the first place? Because it's just creating another problem. And the other bit, certainly in Poole, a lot of the people who come to shop in Poole are from the Purbex. And so that's about rail, and that's about, unfortunately, the Swanage Railway Link, which is part of the ambitions for them and for Dorset Council to link that to Wareham. But you know, if we get them to come around by bus or by rail from the Purbex, then that would help enormously. But again, you know, it doesn't actually need a park and ride. It needs frequent buses, frequent trains, and encouragement through fare structuring and other means to get people on public transport.
I just one of the things that's is beginning to raise its head is the issue of devolution, and I just wondered how you viewed, with a 15-year plan ongoing, how you viewed devolution might affect this transport plan.
Councillor Harriott.
I think what we're seeing elsewhere around the country is that these plans are very much feeding into that devolution, because what has happened up till now is that these plans have been used as part of the grant that's come from government. I think that grant will head towards mayors and will come down in the same way, and it will enable us to almost kind of peel off, but use that structure to fund projects and the priorities that we set. Whether that funding is at the same level and how that comes down in the next few years while we kind of await what government are doing, I don't know yet, I'm afraid.
I only say I'm old and grey and ugly enough to remember the Somerset and Dorset Light Railway, and I do wonder whether or not this is something that we should be looking at in the long term. And also in 2025, we had a gentleman called David Milner who came to talk to us about trams and the regeneration catalyst that trams can cause. So that's something else that every time I come to an environment committee, I shall raise with you. So look forward to that.
Councillor Hartley.
Well, I had my hand up exactly for that point. So Richard mentioned earlier the Western Gateway. So we are in a regional partnership that goes all the way up to South Gloucestershire and Bristol, and includes Wiltshire. It doesn't include Somerset currently. So in terms of the shape of the candidate strategic authority, it's slightly different and smaller. But we have already been submitting plans up to them. So the strategic plans for the Western Gateway include plans from BCP Council for our own area, which appear in this document. So there is a consistency between what we're already feeding up to the subnational board that would again flow. But I think your second point is actually really important, because I think there's something about ambition for the future. If we got a mayoral authority, there will be a lot of discussion in the rural area about rural buses and the lack of any bus for some communities, which is important. But in the urban areas, how do we entice people out of their car for journeys across the conurbation and up and down through the conurbation? It's a great walking and cycling route. The Somerset and Dorset railway line, but it would be even better if it was returned to being a train route, although there have been some bungalows planted across the line in certain places.
It was one of the great crimes of the 20th century.
Councillor Herrick, did you want to add something there?
Yeah, it's just that I get to use one of my favourite lines is that not a single tram scheme has been delivered in the UK post-war without central government funding. Leeds, I think, is next in line where how that funding is arranged through the mayor up there. Remains to be seen. They've got a conurbation of about 500,000. Obviously, they've got a wider metro area being connected to Bradford, but that's not a million miles away from where we are. And if we were in wider Europe, I think we'd probably have a tram system already because they're a differing approach to transport. But there's a lot we can kind of do in the meantime. Well, I think trams are a great aspiration. We do have a bus network that can deliver quite a lot for us before we get there.
I was only going to say there are 21 French cities that have got trams, and I think we've got about 5 cities in this country, and we pay twice as much to build the 28 million a mile as opposed, 28 million a mile in France and Germany, and 42 million in this country.
Thank you for that. Councillor Hadley, go on, I'll let you come back, and then I'm going to Councillor Ricketts.
Ever so quickly, we are talking with the FT. In fact, we talked to them last week, and one of the things we were mentioning was the fact that we are a large conurbation without anything between intercity rail and buses. But as Councillor Herrick highlighted, our bus provider is good, and we need it to act in an integrated fashion, not a competitive fashion, which is a struggle in the UK, as is the costs that the utility companies and others increase the costs of trams. You're absolutely right.
Thank you, Councillor Ricketts.
Thank you, Chair. I did have tram on my LTP discussion bingo card. I'm just disappointed nobody's mentioned monorail yet. My question is about the impact on residents who depend on cars. So my ward covers Matcham's Lane. We have numerous static caravan sites down there. It's a very narrow road. It's a very fast road. There's no pavement. And the residents are predominantly elderly, retired, and they really do rely on their cars. And as the strategy aims to reduce car dependency, I just want to know how the council will ensure that residents with limited alternatives are not disadvantaged, and I also want to know whether there's been an equality impact assessment that's been undertaken for areas where there is poor public transport, like Matcham's Lane, where there are no buses whatsoever, and if residents want to get to the hospital, which a lot of them do on a regular basis, if they haven't got a car, they've got to get a taxi, or if they've got a car, they've got to drive. There's no alternative for them.
Councillor Hadley, do you want to take that to start?
Yeah, I'll start. As I said, a lot of our spend is actually on maintenance of the highway. So in terms of the quality of Matcham's Lane, I know it's a switchback as well. It's actually quite dangerous if you get people going up there way too fast, and the visibility is a challenge, as well as having no pavement. I think is something about that in terms of links up to Ringwood and down to Christchurch in terms of what we might be able to prove in the long term. But we do need to make sure that we are providing capacity. It's not just about that bit of the journey. It's also if they're coming into town, sort of what capacity we've got to be able to deal with traffic. But absolutely, unfortunately, it is car or taxi is the option in some of those rural areas, and it's the same north of Burton. We've got Wington and areas of the rural part of Christchurch which just don't have service with buses that we can support.
I would just, if it's okay, I would just add that obviously there are community transport options as well. So there are obviously our own passenger transport unit obviously operates that service or certainly has links to SEDCAT, the South East Dorset. I've forgotten the acronym. No, it's community accessible transport. There you go. So there are other options. It did merge. There used to be a separate one for Poole, a separate one for Bournemouth, and a separate one for Christchurch. Certainly, I'm aware. I used to manage this area, but not anymore. But I'm aware that it still exists and is still live and being used. That if there are vulnerable people out there that aren't available, then there is another option where they can phone up the community transport line and actually get help and get lifts. And there's obviously volunteer drivers that can help get people to appointments and things as well. That is another option. There's also the council is through the Western Gateway, there is a rural mobility pilot as well. So where there's more rural areas, it's about trying to work out different ways that are improving travel options for people that live in more rural areas as well. So,
Councillor Herrick, did you want to add something first? Or
I'm hoping I might preempt Councillor Rickett's question. I might not. But I think reducing car dependency is not about eliminating it as well. So I think everyone that we can provide an alternative to frees up capacity on the roads for people who do need to drive. You know, my wife has a blue badge, so if we go somewhere as a family, we essentially have to take the car, and we're tied to that. But also, when I go places on my own, I do tend to go by bike, and it's just about, if we provide enough alternatives, it does free up that capacity for people who do still need to use the car. But I also worry with an ageing population about how those people are going to access those healthcare abilities, especially with a lot of kind of doctors being not able to offer home visits in the same way that they were used to as well. And I think there's almost a whole system that we need to kind of think about as people age, especially if they are car dependent. I can't answer all those questions though, unfortunately, because they're not in our area.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean that's why I asked about whether an equality impact assessment had been undertaken, because you know, the policy is trying to encourage people, but I mean, like I say, Matcham saying, there's not even a footpath, so they can't even just walk down to Herne Post Office, you know, to go and get a sandwich or something like that. There is nothing. And yes, there is community transport, but it's been severely reduced over the years. And I get calls from my residents to say, you know, it's practically impossible. And now to get to Christchurch Hospital, it costs £18 one way. Which is in a taxi, which is, you know, when people are on a limited income, on a fixed income, obviously it's very difficult for them. So that's why I just wondered about the equality impact assessment. And as somebody who is getting older, I've just decided to buy, well, a couple of months ago, bought myself an e-bike, because I thought, well, if you can't beat them, join them. But I don't go down Matcham's Lane because it's too dangerous. It really is.
There is an equality impact assessment in the appendices for tonight, so please have a look. And obviously we get to go to cabinet, so any feedback we can still consider.
Could I just add as well, sorry, there are a number of kind of references throughout the strategy document itself, recognising that some of these solutions aren't appropriate in all parts of Dorset and BCP and aren't appropriate for everyone. So we'd have added in, after the consultation, some more references around travel choice. So it's not making it that people have to travel in a certain way, it's providing that choice if they want to and if it's appropriate in the location that they are. And just on the equalities impact as well, obviously there's a long list of potential schemes that we want to deliver here, and each scheme would be subject to its own equalities impact assessment as it comes forward for delivery, as well as the one that covers the plan as a whole.
Thank you. And the last question on this tonight, and Councillor Gillett.
Super quick. Just a clarification. When I was sort of reading through, so the 25% of children that are entitled to free school meals, they can get a free bus pass. Is that right? If they live more than 3 miles away from the school?
I believe so.
Yeah. So in terms of the cost, so for those, so going back to the cost for the children, it would be that sector of society wouldn't have to pay for those bus passes. That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, there's an eligibility criteria. When we obviously earlier this year, in fact, there was a paper taken through Cabinet and Council on subsidised bus services, where we had to consolidate some of those services to obviously, generate savings for the budget for the council. Again, that all went through an equalities impact assessment and was fully consulted upon. But yes, you're right. There are people that are entitled, they're assessed, and obviously if there's a need, then they will be given a bus pass. Yeah.
And one very quick further clarification. Last year there was a planning event going through for an expansion on the airport, and I was looking at the old applications, and there was a section 106 on a previous application which had gone through Christchurch Council actually, and it was saying that there was there was needed to be a bus that was going to be in place, and I asked the planning officer if we could add a new 106 to the application last summer, and he said, "Well, no, that's absolutely no need at all. You just need to that just needs to go through enforcement because that's already in place." So is that being enforced? Is that where we are now, or is there anything else that can be done with that?
So that is taking place at the moment.
Okay, the enforcement is going to
Yes.
take place. And will
Yes.
Okay, I don't think we've got any more speakers on this item. So again, all that's has to be say is thank you for coming in and bringing this item to us. I don't believe anyone's got any recommendations they wanted to bring forward or anything like that. So, Councillor Canavan.
So I'm sure this is fine, and I'm sure Cabinet will approve it. What's in my head is, how do we test it's going to work? How do we test it will work? Because it seems to me that the objectives are to reduce dependence on cars, and that means providing alternative forms of transport for people to get. So how do we test whether this plan achieves that aim?
Councillor Hadley.
Yeah, so it's partly about provision, it's partly about encouragement. So there's something about providing stuff and something about people using it. We have Annex 3 is the monitoring evaluation strategy, and that highlights how over the life of the plan we will be looking to see how it's progressing. But we're working, particularly in schools, we're working with colleagues from the Walk Wheel Cycle Trust to encourage kids to get to school without the car, and part of that is around school streets and making it safer for them to do that, and part of our work on the active travel monies that we've had from government is to work with 3 school clusters, our biggest 3 school clusters, in terms of that whole journey experience, to try and make it safer. So we're starting with people who are at the beginning of their journey, at the beginning of their life, and as and it comes right back to the statement at the beginning. Young people want to be able to travel independently and supported to do that, and we need to find ways to do that. And they're not in a position to drive. They're not in a position actually to use a barrel because those are meant to be certain scooters offer over you need a driving license. So we're doing what we can, particularly with young people. We need to do more with the whole population, really. And the other bit is with businesses. We're working on travel plans with businesses. So it's part of those soft things about encouraging people to consider alternatives or when they're provided and they feel safe to use them.
Okay, thank you. On that note, I can close this item. Again, thank you for bringing it to us. It's a good discussion, and we look forward to seeing it being tested and being implemented as well, assuming that Cabinet approves this on Wednesday. Item number 9 is our work plan. So we had a really thorough discussion on this at the last meeting. So if the committee's happy to just note it as is, thank you. And again, the corporate performance report for Q4. This was circulated to all councillors between meetings. It's not for debate, but it's just included for the audit trail, so everyone's just content to note that. And finally, all that leaves me to say is the date of the next meeting is Wednesday, the 9th of September. Thank you to everyone who's come in tonight, been part of this, everyone who's spoken, all of the officers and councillors, anyone who might still be watching this at home. Thank you very much, and good night, everyone. See you soon.